Hello and welcome to Our Game with myself, Shane Stapleton. Joining me this week is All-Ireland winner Colin Ryan, man from Clare. Did the business in 2013. We've had a massive weekend, Colin. Just a reminder to people before we get going, we're brought to you by orgaretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame if you want to get 15% off any of these jerseys on the screen. Every county is covered on the website there, or maybe even this snazzy little Cork one that I'm wearing here at the moment, Colin. It really was the weekend for Cork in the manner that they beat Limerick. I mean, just even to look at the scoreline, 219 to 113 in the Gaelic grounds. There's not many teams doing that these days.
It's the manner in which they were beaten by. You know, it's not like this was a kind of a grab, you know, in the Gaelic grounds. It was just like in all the stakes, they really beat them yesterday. Like I thought, the additions Cork have added to their squad this year, you know, are really making a difference. I think what people forget as well is that like Ger Mellerick was injured for the All-Ireland final last year, you know, and they had him earmarked to pick up Cian Lynch, and like that freed up Mark Coleman. But really, like the way they transitioned yesterday, like I thought last year they went laterally an awful lot. You know, they were going over and back, whereas like the pace, they just went straight, you know, through the middle. But Mark Keane, you know, Shane Barrett, Kieran Joyce is a massive find. You know, he has been probably their best hurler in the league so far. And like Kingston is obviously getting stronger. He's feeling, you know, Shane Barrett's getting stronger. Mark Keane, like, just they seem to be in such a different place, and they had an edge about them yesterday that you could say they certainly didn't have for the All-Ireland final. And there definitely is something there that they were obviously hurting after that performance, you know, last year. So like, I wouldn't say I'm worried for Limerick quite yet, but you know, definitely like Cork came on my radar now a bit more yesterday. That like, you know, I'd certainly be worried from a Clare perspective, you know, about what they could do in the Munster Championship. You know, normally you kind of feel that maybe all the other teams are kind of the same, whereas Cork really stepped up yesterday and kind of really became that team that were second behind Limerick, I suppose. On pass form anyway. Limerick still have a lot to get up to at the minute, but I'm still not writing them off.
Oh, certainly not. But Joe, we'll go a bit more into that game in a minute. But one thing that really stood out over the weekend was referees clamping down on perceived throwing of the ball. Now, there's supposed to be that clear and obvious striking action where you release it, and then I have one of the yellow slitters here. I whipped it from the Tipperary end there against Dublin the other day. Hopefully they don't come after me for it. But like I've heard, the information I've got is that there was a referees meeting last Wednesday week, and they got grilled on the hand pass, and it's something that will be continuing. So teams are going to keep getting pulled on it. So they might as well start practicing it. What's your thoughts on that? I have to say myself, it's not something that I was overly concerned with. But then when I saw the refs clamping down on it over the weekend, I was like, Joe, what? Pretty much nearly all the time, I agree with you. That Grode McInerney one, maybe not so much. But like if the referee couldn't see it, if it wasn't perceptible to him, you know, you're not going to get everyone right. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I did think that it kind of had become, you know, too much of a throw. You know, like when teams are transition, it was nearly as if like they weren't even making the effort, you know, to make that split from the ball. And I think obviously, you know, I heard, you know, they were saying on League Sunday last night about like, you know, that, oh, it's up to the referee to see it. But I don't think so. I think like it's up to players now to establish a clear connection between ball and pass, you know, and if the ref thinks that's in doubt, you know, then pull it. I think like it is a skill of our game, you know, like otherwise what are we doing? You're throwing the slitter around the place, you know, like, and it just becomes something completely different, you know. And I don't agree with the idea like of changing the rule of going, oh, you have to hand pass from one hand to the other, you know, because the tackle then is just, you know, then you have to start looking at the tackle because, you know, what people are going to be doing is just pulling one hand, like, and it's impossible, you know, if you're caught up in a situation to release a second hand, you know, or switch hurleys, or, you know, you're dropping the hurley. So like, I think it's really just going to be up to teams now to, you know, work on it and training and just establish a clear connection between ball and hand. But like there was the perception there that Limerick were doing it more than everybody else. I don't think they were. I think it's just that Limerick probably played a lot more ball around in their back line, you know, probably uncontested, that looked like they were playing it, you know, they were doing more hand passing. But I think everybody was kind of getting caught with it. But I actually liked it the weekend. I didn't think the refs were overly picky, you know. There was only a couple of them in the game, and like you know, I think they'll clamp down it very quickly if they start pulling it. And, you know, I suppose if they pull it into championship, maybe, you know, it might clamp down a bit more. All these rules seem to come in for the league. We have this discussion every single year about a rule that they've changed or tried to change. But, you know, I really do think that if they continue this into championship, it'll just make for, I suppose, a talking point that won't be there and shouldn't be there really when it comes to our game. You know, like, we shouldn't be talking about the ball being thrown, or, you know, it's a distraction really from the actual quality of the game. So, like, if they can clamp down on that, then, you know, we'll be talking about better things, hopefully.
Yeah, plenty of comments coming in here. Willie Walsh says, will Limerick's lack of depth in the bench haunt them this year? Flanagan's red looked harsh enough. I'm not sure. I think I agreed with both of the red cards. If anything, I thought more people could have got sent off in that game. Very happy with the Cork performance yesterday, says Liam O'Neill, and hopefully plenty of room for improvements as there is with Limerick. Kieran Joyce looks a great addition. Barry John says on Patreon, if you want to catch the Thursday show, it's only patreon.com/OurGame. He goes, how are you, Shane? Any chance you can discuss how super sensitive Limerick people are to any type of criticism? They seem unwilling to admit that Limerick can be a little dirty. I tried explaining that you can be the best hurling team and dirty at the same time. It's okay to be both, but they don't seem to want to hear it. My own Cork team from 99 to 05 are well able to dish it out. It doesn't detract from what a great team they were, and the obvious one is Kilkenny, of course. Also great to see the hand pass being pulled. It was getting stupid. You're right there on the border. You know the Limerick people very, very well. I don't know if you're teaching with any Limerick people down there as well, but yeah, would you agree with that? Limerick people being a bit sensitive, because there has been a huge reaction to some of the videos that I put up on Twitter or on YouTube over the weekend.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, this team, they're very protective of this team, I think, in general. You know, I think, like, that, you know, this team, it's a phenomenal team. Like, let me start by saying that, like, you know, that they're one of the best teams. You know, they're definitely, they have a bit to go in terms of winning things, and you know, and being as good as the Kilkenny team, you know, of the 2000s, shall we say. But, like, they still, you know, they're still making their way, and, like, they could easily win this year, you know, and really, like, kind of, you know, put it back. But yeah, like, they are edgy, you know, but it kind of what makes them good, you know, like, I wouldn't necessarily take it away from him. Like, Hegarty, yeah, like, he's loose with the hurley, but, like, you know, he's a physical man, and, like, he probably has to do an awful lot more to win a free himself, you know, so, like, he probably is just protecting himself. I don't mind it. Like, I don't mind them being edgy. I don't mind them being, you know, that bit on the dirty side. It's just that, like, I think, you know, you can't have rose-tinted glasses either. You know, I think if they do something and it's over the edge and they get sent off for it, then, you know, that's their own fault, you know, and they're going to hinder themselves. Like, they got away with one last year. You know, Galan should have been red carded, you know, definitely. And, you know, not so much, I suppose, Hegarty's always looked loose, but he wasn't really connecting that much, I suppose, with people. You know, if Hegarty had connected with a helmet with one of them swing backs, I'm sure he'd have got a red card as well. So, like, I don't mind it. I think there's just probably, maybe there's distractions maybe, and kind of using it as excuses maybe for their poor form. They think there's probably a witch hunt against them throwing the ball and the red cards. But I didn't see, you know, I thought Hegarty's was a red card. You know, he shouldn't have went with his hurley up that high. I thought Flanagan's yesterday, I suppose, if the first one was a red card, then his was probably a red, and so should the Cork hurler. I think that they caught Hannon. I can't remember.
Sean
yeah,
Toomey.
like, I thought, you know, consistency. Like, you know, if you're going to give the other two, you probably had to give that one, and I don't think anybody would have questioned the referee for it. You know, if he had given it as well. But like, yeah, like, they are protective, but I think there's a bit going on here in terms of, you know, I suppose it's distractions from their poor form. But they're on the pedestal now to be got at, and, like, you know, you're going to have to take that criticism, or, you know, everybody's out to get you. Everybody's out to knock you off that pedestal. So, like, you know, I think they're just going to have to get used to it, because I don't think it's going away.
Yeah, deal with it. And, like I've said before, if there are red card tackles, I'm not going to shy away from it just because some Limerick supporters are crying about it and feeling like their team are being attacked. You're finally on top for a consistent number of years. Get used to it. This is what the pressure is like when you're on top. But by the way, we're going to have Fintan O'Toole and Martin Kearney on to talk Gaelic football a little bit later on. Obviously, loads happened there. But just to look at a couple more of those red card incidents, I thought that there was a coming together of Darragh O'Donovan, I think it was Tim O'Mahony, over on the uncovered stand side up around the 45. I think Darragh O'Donovan was lucky he didn't connect with O'Mahony, because he kind of dug the hurley toward, you know, head height. I think Jack O'Connor could have easily gone in the Galway game. He went in a little bit late, hard and high. You said Sean Toomey, but also Declan Hannon was already on a yellow, and he came back with the hurley kind of half in under the chin. Now, I'm not saying any of these lads are dirty players per se, but you kind of have to call it when you see it, don't you, Colin? Otherwise, things will go nuts. And it's also down to a referee to call it out too, because if he lets a few bad ones go, all of a sudden everyone feels like there's martial law here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, as well as that, like when somebody gets hit like that and you don't deal with it, then suddenly there's an arciness that comes into the game, and it probably gets away from a referee, and you're dealing with an awful lot more stop-start kind of things. But like I didn't see an issue with any of them. As I said, I thought it should have been probably a red for Toomey. Yeah, arguably, like Declan Hannon, going back, like there seems to be a bit of a frustration to Limerick's game at the minute. That they're not really kind of kicking in. You can see kind of the players are getting a small bit frustrated because it's very unlike them, to react that way. Darragh O'Donovan, even with Tim O'Mahony, it's like, but you need to get out of the habit of going with a hurley. I think, I remember the best piece of advice I ever had from a manager was like, just drop the hurley, go with your hands, because I won't say it's cowardly, but hitting with a hurley is, you don't need to hit with a hurley, it's hurling is there for, the digging and stuff like that. I don't really want to see it. And I suppose just getting it up near the head now, I suppose it's gone a bit like rugby, any tackle near the head, whether it's a hurley or whether it's I know from experience of a local clubman, who's been out for nearly a year with concussion, so like, we can't take it lightly. But I think if we can stay away from the head area, whether that's a hurley or a shoulder into the head and clamp down on them, then, the game becomes more enjoyable, and stuff like that. But there seems to be just a bit of frustration on Limerick's side, that they're not really going as well as maybe they have been in previous years. But I would say they're probably a bit behind too, in terms of their preparation.
Yeah, and like also they've plenty of star players that can come into the team. It was notable that John Kiley did replace a lot of the more emerging players who, are talented and, have loads of time to come on and be really important players, but brought on Aaron Gillan, Will O'Donoghue and Diarmuid Burns at half time. He was looking for a reaction the second half. They won the second half, so obviously there's positives there, but they're the lowest scorers in the top 12 teams in both Division 1A and 1B. They've averaged 16 points per game. That's not great. Just a final thing on the red card incidents. My take on it was, right, obviously Shane Kingston deserved to get a red card. I don't think anyone's really debating that. But I have a feeling that he wanted to meet Sean Finn because after Kingston scored his goal, the one where he pulled into the net, I felt that Sean Finn unnecessarily sort of changed direction slightly to leave one in on Kingston, who was then holding his head on the ground. And I don't think he went to do him, but I do think there's an element of retribution that I'm going to plant you here. You always look to plant a lad on the shoulder, obviously, but like I think he went in a little bit more recklessly because of what had happened beforehand.
Yeah, I think it was fresh in his mind. I think, like when you get it done like that, normally you feel worse if you've missed a goal, but like, when Kingston scored the goal, you kind of be like, okay. But yeah, I don't think he necessarily went in to absolutely hit him in the head. Like if you look at it and slow it down, Sean Finn did kind of slow and change his direction last minute, but it's still reckless, like he went in at fierce pace and he was out of control, in terms of what he was going to hit. But yeah, I'm sure it was probably fresh in his mind, but I think in general, Cork had that about him yesterday, that they were like, we're not going to be bossed by Limerick, and possibly when that happened, he was probably just a case of, well, this is an opportunity here now for me to go hard, maybe, hit a good shoulder and stuff like that. But it was reckless and, he deserved to go.
Yeah, and just some of the things that impressed me about Cork, I'll just run through their scores. Patrick Horgan scored 8 points, 7 of those from placed balls, but he was really instrumental in both goals, like really clever stuff for both of them. Lovely hand pass for the first Kingston one, and the way he popped it off to Conor Lahan, who came through and had his shot blocked for the second one, was really good. Robbie O'Flynn, Shane Kingston got 2 goals. Robbie O'Flynn, Mark Coleman, Darragh Fitzgibbon and Conor Lahan, who was very good, scored 2 each. Barrett, Conor Cahalane and Tim O'Mahony 1 each. Colin O'Neill scored 1-1 for Limerick. Diarmuid Burns and David Reedy scored 3 points each. All but one of those was from a free. Gillan got a couple from frees. Flanagan, Darragh O'Donovan, Keane Lynch and Graham Mulcahy, they also got points here. But some of the things that impressed me, you already mentioned Kieran Joyce. I mean, what an option he is to throw in at midfield. Looks really good. Mark Keane probably didn't quite work for him yesterday, but I mean, he's obviously only freshly back from the AFL, so it's going to be very tough for him to just slot straight in. Patrick Collins, I think, is developing into a better and better goalkeeper all the time. Like I'd say the difference between the likes of Limerick and now especially Cork, the way they're able to, win a ball in a contact area and then feed it back out the back door, back across to the goalkeeper or, a defender out there and move it up in the other wing away from the traffic. This is the things that the top teams are now going to do against Limerick. So I think Cork are really good at that compared with the likes of Tipp, who are trying to change at the moment. Do you think that teams doing this now is going to give Limerick that fresh sort of challenge, and can they respond?
Yeah, for sure. But like the one thing is, like I worry about this with like a team like Clare, for instance. You could see similarities maybe in Galway yesterday. Teams that maybe aren't as comfortable on the ball in their defence, are kind of like, teams are targeting, like you saw Dahi Burke yesterday, kind of, he got caught. It came back to him, he went back to the goalkeeper. Yeah, and he went back again, and then he got blocked. And, Wexford are really comfortable on the ball, moving it across the field. But it was definitely something I noticed in the Cork game yesterday that, like, their ability to kind of go down one side and to see that it was closed off and to go back around, to the other side. It's nearly like a kind of a football move, but in hurling, it happens so quickly that everybody kind of drifts to one side of the field and the space opens up something, crazy on the other side. And what you can do is if you end up getting your shooters on that side of the field, Limerick are really good at maybe having Diarmaid Burns or Kyle Hayes, to kind of end up on that side of the field on their own, keeping their width, and they're not drawn kind of to that side. And they're opening up the field and the delivery to ball. But what I noticed about Cork yesterday as well was that, like, the likes of Horgan, like, he wasn't doing everything himself. There was a real trust in the players around him. Like he was laying off balls that, like, you'd be like, Pat Horgan would have shot them, definitely last year, and maybe there's a bit of him working his way back into the team, and stuff like that. But there's definitely a trust and a kind of an ability that the ball goes to the better man. And the ball goes to the man in space, and they seem to be just have an awful lot more runners and options yesterday. And they looked really fit. Lahan coming into it as another shooter, somebody who kind of ends up in these spaces that, are dangerous and stuff like that. But yeah, like, teams are kind of letting Limerick have the ball and closing down their space in their full forward line and cutting off their options. Maybe that, when you look at what Limerick had success over the last couple of years, it's that kind of early ball into Gillan, Casey, Flanagan, creating absolute havoc, and goal chances. Whereas, they've created very little goal chances, in the league this year. Teams have kind of said, okay, you can have the ball back there, but, what are you going to do with it? You're not going to, Peter Casey missing, I think, is a big loss too. I think he, his ability to make that full forward line tick, I think, and Glenn is obviously off form a small bit. Kylie's kind of, has taken him off now a couple of times, hasn't started him. And Flanagan has kind of been, I suppose, in and out of the team. He's probably been starting the last couple of games. But, like, that Limerick full forward line was their real kind of, like, line that was dangerous, and was isolating players inside. Whereas teams have kind of said, what, you're going to have to beat us with, scores from out the field. And, yeah, like, it's like anything, they're going to work you out. Good coaches are going to work you out and think about something. And I suppose coming out of COVID now, teams have an awful lot more time to prepare. They've kind of been thinking about things, and they're meeting probably an awful lot more and discussing it and being able to work on things that maybe they weren't able to work on.
Yeah, like, I'm going through some of my notes from the game yesterday. In the first half, where Limerick scored just 5 points, which, they were 2 points to 1 ahead. So that means they lost the rest of the half by 12 to 3 points, which is, that's eye-raising stuff. And I know they lost games last year in the league, but not really quite like this. It was so emphatic in that first half. But, like, just 3 points from play, 2 of them from forwards, Seamus Flanagan and Reedy. Darragh Donovan got the other one. It was interesting that Declan Hannon, who's obviously such a class player, he was so quiet. He fouled the ball at one stage. Kyle Hayes, very quiet. He had a wide at one stage, no massive impact. I mean, would you, if you were opposition now and you were coming up against Limerick now the next day, do you feel like there's real areas to exploit now? Do you feel like they can't just turn it around midstream, because they do look to be, struggling a little bit at the moment? Or is it just a case they're pacing themselves?
You see, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Like, nobody, only they know kind of what their pace is like, in terms of, I suppose, preparing for championship. And this year, I suppose, everything is coming a bit faster, and a bit quicker. And, like, if you get stuck in a rut and start losing games, it is something that, it eats away at you. And, like, the confidence kind of starts to go away slightly. But I'm still not writing them up, but what the worry would be for them is that like they're big guns, apart from maybe Keane Lynch, who probably he's been very impressive in Fitzgibbon, and he's only really come back to it. But like they haven't really been as dominant, like for lads who 12 All-Stars it was, however long ago, like a couple of months ago, like these players just don't seem to be getting back up to the same level as quickly. Kyle Hayes didn't look great yesterday. Declan Hannon looked leggy. He didn't look as kind of, free-flowing. O'Donoghue obviously only came on, had an injury, I suppose, to his shoulder. Darragh O'Donovan hasn't looked as impressive. Tom Morrissey hasn't looked as, like, I think the worry for John Kiley is it's not just a couple of players. It seems to be them all, which is quite strange. Normally you'd have a couple of players that you'd be kind of worried about, but apart from maybe Sean Finn, who seems to be just the best cornerback in the game, day in, day out, there's a real kind of, which leads me to believe that maybe, are they undercooked? If they're all so far behind, are they waiting for things to kind of, but you don't have much time this year.
Yeah, have you ever been in a situation where like your team is not going well and all of a sudden you just find a spark, or do you have to slowly work yourself into form?
Yeah, like you see, it was different, I suppose. Like I played pre-round robin, so like you always had a big gap between league and championship. So if things weren't going right in the league, there was always time to run the legs off somebody, or the big, you do 2 or 3 weeks of hard work, or you do the opposite, and take 2 or 3 weeks off, and stuff like that. Whereas my big worry this year is that, like, for teams is that everything is coming so fast. Like the league finishes and championship is very quickly after it. So like if you're not, I find it hard to turn it around. Maybe mentally they're kind of just saying, listen, we don't want to be going after them now so early. But I can't imagine Kiley and Kinnerk and the management are pleased, with their performances. I'm sure they would have been thinking, okay, like, here we'll slowly build our way in here, but then suddenly, it starts to kind of steamroll and teams go, okay, maybe they're not, as good as, you're giving other teams a chance. When they see you playing like that, you're kind of, every other team is kind of going, okay, hang on now here a second. This is how teams are beating them. Let's match them physically and let's, be fitter and let's move the ball a bit quicker and let's close down their spaces in their full forward line. And suddenly we have a chance to beat them. For a team that for 2 years I couldn't see anybody laying a glove on them. Like teams are really coming after them this year. And I think it's, what surprises me is how quick teams have developed, to come after them. I was expecting it maybe, that one team might kind of catch up with them this year and try and have a right good cut at them. But they all seem to be kind of really, going after them the same way. Matching them physically, but will that continue into championship and will they bring a different aggression into championship? Who knows? But they don't have a lot of players to bring back in. It's not as if they're, they're waiting on, a kind of a big turnover of players to come back in. He's kind of been using them, a lot over the last time. And you look at somebody like Cathal O'Neill, who has been, probably their most impressive newcomer. But where does he slot in? Because does that mean you're going to change Tom Morrissey, Keane Lynch, and Groat Hegarty? They've kind of been lucky that they've always been missing one of them, in recent games. Do they put him into the forward line, but then does he offer the same as what Peter Casey does?
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's no like for like really with Peter Casey. Like David Reedy would probably prefer to be in the half forward line himself. Like Seamus Flanagan and Aaron Glenn will most likely start there in championship, and rightly so. Graham Mulcahy remains to be seen if they put him back in again as a starter this year. You wouldn't be entirely sure. And I know you said Keane Lynch has been playing well in the Fitzgibbon Cup, but I thought he was playing well at spells. Like I remember watching him in the UCD game for NUIG, and just a couple of times when the team needed, he put the paw up, he won the freeze, he knocked over points effortlessly. I thought in the final actually against UL, he was pretty quiet before the ridiculous red card, which was obviously never a red card. But I thought Brian O'Mara did pretty well in him. I thought he was kept quiet. I thought he was quiet enough in this game. It was probably the most quiet game I've ever seen him play. Like he had a pick up at one stage. Even that time that they got the goal, like his hand did go across Niall O'Leary's face. I struggled to see how that would end up being a concussion. But even so, it just, like, I think he's the best player in the country. And I'm not, I don't think there's much disputing that. But like, if even he's not fully firing at the moment, and I know he can turn it around very quickly, that's where I'd be concerned for them if you're going to be concerned for a rival county.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like, listen, like he's obviously, you know, enjoying his Fitzgibbon hurling, but in the long run for Limerick, I don't know. Was it probably, you know, the best thing for Limerick that Cian Lynch went from probably, you know, did they lose the county final with the Well? You know, I think they did. I think they lost the county final. So yeah, so he went from, like, you know, kind of a season finishing very late last year inter-county to a, you know, successful club campaign that, you know, went all the way to into Fitzgibbon hurling in the winter. You know, like, it's a lot of hurling, it's a lot of matches, it's a lot of time where you're getting yourself up, you know, to 100%, you know, all the time. It's different, you know, if you're training a lot, but like, it's a lot of hurling, and it's a lot of hurling where you're probably the most watched man on the field, you know, as well, and you're getting hits, and, you know, teams are starting to kind of, I won't say find you out, but he is their talisman, you know. So, like, I'm sure Cork would have been saying yesterday, and, you know, they'd have been riling up Mellerick, you know, all week, kind of going, listen, you know, this is your match, you know, we'll you know, settle into this, and don't give him anything, you know, and don't let them kind of to go. But I think their fulcrum of probably, you know, Cian Lynch, O'Donovan and O'Donoghue, you know, working, you know, tirelessly together, you know, in a kind of a partnership. Neither of the three of them kind of got going yesterday, you know. Even when O'Donoghue came on in the second half, they just didn't seem to have that flow. He wasn't bossing them, you know. You just wonder, maybe was he holding back because of his shoulder injury, you know? Is he just kind of working his way back in? Is it still bothering him a small bit? But he was the real enforcer, you know. O'Donoghue was the real enforcer of that Limerick midfield, that when, you know, teams kind of come into that zone, he seems to be the one that goes kind of after them. But they certainly, you know, teams are definitely matching them physically. You know, the three teams that, now, in saying that, I suppose apart from Cork, I would have said that Wexford and Galway would probably be one of the more physical teams they would come up against. You know, Wexford like it when it goes into the middle. You know, they put a lot of bodies in there, you know, and they fit people. But, like, Waterford are going to do the same. You know, they're all going to look at this model, you know, and Waterford are going to try, and Kilkenny are going to try and do the same. You know, like, so I think they're going to have a lot of these teams to come through this year, you know, to go after it. And I think a couple of teams have really put their hands up and kind of said, you know, we want next in line.
Yeah, I think Patrick Horgan reminded us of how important he is. Like, the first couple of games when he wasn't started, part of me wondered, are they trying to find successors here? And no, I mean, obviously he's still absolutely world, like, as class as you get.
I don't think so. I think he's like, he's top level, and even his ball winning ability, like that catch over Dan Morrissey, was like, there isn't many players in the game that could do that. He's such good risk. But it was his unselfishness, actually. If you looked at it, like, he definitely had a shot at goal there, you know, for that.
But you know, like, what? He gave the defender the sort of eyes as if he was shaping to strike, and then passed it across. Lovely ball, crossfield ball in by Robbie O'Flynn as well. He could have taken the shot on, but instead, beautiful. Yeah, and
I think what Patrick Horgan is the talisman of Cork's forward line. You know, I think he makes them tick. You know, I don't think there's anybody else that can offer up the same as what he offers. You know, his level of intelligence, I think people underestimate his level of intelligence, you know, on top of his ball winning ability. You know, he seems to be always out in front. He seems to be always kind of get a touch in. Like, he's not afraid of the tough stuff. And definitely their delivery of ball into him and Kingston was better yesterday. You know, and then having, you know, Barrett is really stepping up, and even Conor Cahalan, you know, come on yesterday. Like, their options this year, like, they're nearly going with a whole new forward line, you know, to what they were in the All-Ireland last year. Like, you know, apart from obviously Kingston, who only, if you remember, you know, kind of shot the lights out in the semi-final and got back in at the final. You know, they have a very different forward line, but what they have brought on this year to the panel is improving them right now. You know, is making them a better team right now, whereas an awful lot of other teams are kind of looking to the future.
Were you surprised to see Conor Lehane dropped? I mean, obviously you've been 2 All-Ireland finals against him, obviously not marking each other, but against him. Like, to me, he's got hurler of the year type talent, but now that he's bringing players into the game and he isn't just looking for his own score, like, he could be the missing ingredient in that forward line, I'm thinking.
Yeah, like, I felt a bit sorry for Conor Lehane, you know. Originally when he got dropped, I thought, I thought, yeah, he does drift in and out of games, and maybe they were kind of looking for leadership, maybe to come, maybe from a different level. But he is very different to what they have, and I didn't necessarily think he was uncoachable. Like he doesn't come across as a type of fella that's going to throw, the ties out of the pram. Like if anything, you could see that he kind of just went, do you know what, I'm going to prove people wrong. And like if anything, Kingston would have looked, kind of very silly if he didn't call him in this year. How good he was in the campaign, but. Yeah, like, and even, if you only get 40 minutes out of him, if you kind of just say to him, listen, go at it for 40 minutes and give us something different. But even the catch, the score he got one score yesterday where, like, he was out in front, he caught the ball, put the ball down, burst through two Limerick lads and tapped it over. It was a real Conor Lahan score. But he definitely, if they're not going to go with Lahan and Harnedy, like, I think, you can easily replace like for like. Harnedy could come on, Lahan, they're very similar, but you do need that experience, and both players offer something completely different. But Cork definitely have an awful lot more options in their forward line this year than what they had last year.
Yeah, there's some amount of comments coming in here. Plenty of compliments for you as well about being robbed of that All-Star that we keep saying back in 2013. Flash says Cork fans should be concentrating on Queevy and Kelleher winning Liverpool the League Cup. A Cork spokesperson winning a meaningful game. Only positive for Limerick yesterday was not even playing well. They won the second half. So we could talk about that all day. And one final point on Cork is not only did they use their speed to run at Limerick, they ran straight up the guts. Like, they ran up the centre. That's the thing that I thought, that you might actually be inviting trouble on yourself by going into traffic. But I don't think every team could potentially, like, I'm not sure every team could do that, could they, Colin?
No, you, like, your game plan is, based off the athletic ability of your players. Like, if you can't do that for 70 minutes, or don't have players that can come on and do that for 70 minutes, you're wasting the time developing that game plan, because then what you'll get is when lads get tired, they'll start to do the same thing, and then you'll get bottled up, and then your options are very limited. But like what you find yesterday is O'Leary and O'Donoghue, like, they can come from deep. They are serious physical, presence, but they have speed on top of it all. And it's kind of what, I suppose, Sean Finn offers Limerick, that they can come from deep. Damien Reck was very good for Wexford over the weekend, coming from deep. And it's my big worry, like, that, obviously my own county, it's my big worry that, like, yeah, we have Rory Hayes, who'll come at lightning ability, but, I'd be worried when probably maybe the likes of Cleary or Paul Flanagan, they don't come at that kind of pace. They aren't that kind of player that will drive out through the middle and then have the composure, to do something. And when you look at it, like, who does have that this year? Wexford do, Cork do, Waterford certainly do, have that composure and athleticism that, they can come from deep out through the middle, but then have that composure on the ball, even as cornerbacks, to deliver great ball or to take a score, and there isn't many teams that can, they can match that. And that's the teams that seem to be successful at the minute.
Yeah, and not only that, teams that are trying to do it, it's not going to work for you the first day out. You remember Limerick battered Cork in the league last year. Cork stuck to the system and they had to, but they did suffer a bit of pain along the way. Also in Group A, Offaly beat Clare. Clare beat Offaly. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then Wexford saw off Galway 2-15 to 15 points at Pearse Stadium. Like, that's a pretty significant win for Dara Egan. They're 3 wins from 3. Henry Shefflin was at home, like, obviously wants to impress the people there. But that's, like, what are we thinking of Wexford at this stage? Because, when I saw them in the Walsh Cup final, they got annihilated by Dublin, and I was wondering, where's this team going? But 3 wins from 3.
Yeah, I kind of didn't know what to make of Wexford early in the year, but, like, Rory O'Connor looks like the best hurler in the country at present. But I think it's the way they're playing now. They're leaving more players up top. They're delivering better ball into those players. But I don't think they've lost their identity completely in terms of they're still working the ball into better positions. But they're probably counting on less players to do that work now in the middle third. And to have options up the field, as much as possible. But Rec is very good. D. O'Keefe, Paddy Foley has been excellent at centre back for him. He's really been a driving force up through the middle of teams. And then they had Kevin Foley coming back in yesterday. Like, so they have a lot of players around the middle of that field that can run very direct. But I suppose the big plus has been Rory O'Connor's form. You know, they haven't had a forward that I suppose they've been counting on Conor McDonald. They've been trying to transform Lee Chin into a free-flowing forward, and I don't think that has worked. But Rory O'Connor looks like, you know, he's a real top-class sharpshooter, and, you know, every team needs one of them at least, you know, who's going to get you your 3 or 4 points from play every day he goes out. And I've been very impressed with him to date, but they're playing to his strengths.
Do you like it? So I'm wondering what's the difference between what Darragh Egan was doing, or what he is doing so far this year, versus what Davy Fitz, who obviously was your manager with Clare. What's the difference in terms of how they're playing? So what's sticking out to me is that there are more players sticking up front, and then Rory O'Connor is regularly up there. Is there anything else that you're seeing? And I mean, obviously it's still only league, so this is no guarantee of a good championship.
Well, I thought with Wexford the last couple of years, they were probably committing too many bodies back to field. And when you do that, like, you have to have a different level of fitness completely to be able to, like, bring everybody back and then to attack everybody at the same time. And what you're doing there is you're not maybe creating goal chances as much. You're allowing teams to sit back against you and kind of invite you on. You know that, yeah, okay, we'll keep our shape back here. And when you get to the 50-yard line, you know, we're going to come on you. And suddenly then it's, you know, you're either going to shoot it from there, or you're going to have a runner coming, you know, as well. And to play that game, you know, it becomes very, as a team, the amount of hard runs you have to make constantly is just, it's wearing on you. Whereas I think they're letting the ball do an awful lot more of the work this year. You know, they are kind of creating the space. They still have runners, they still have options, but they're not them short passes aren't coming as much. You know, they're trying to release the ball a bit quicker and a bit longer, you know, and then suddenly you're not counting on as many players to do as much hard work, whereas they were kind of maybe doing an awful lot more short passing. And if you're doing an awful lot of short passing, then players are using their legs an awful lot more. And if they're using their legs an awful lot more, then they're just going to get tired quicker, you know. So they're definitely letting the ball do a bit more of the work, and creating a bit more space, I think. And they're also kind of, I suppose, committing defenders to picking up men back there, which is opening up more space in the middle of the field for them to maybe to do that work a bit easier.
Yeah, Patrick Hickey says here, Wexford have put a lot into the league. Will they be able to keep this going for another 3 or 4 months? So obviously this is different to before, because like you said earlier, you might have that training, that period of periodization, and get yourself ready for championship. Like, this one is going to roll straight into the other. If you've no league semi-final and final, maybe you have an extra 3 weeks or something like that. But it's not like that 10 weeks you might have had before.
I don't think anybody's going to know what will work this year until the end of the year. You know, I think hindsight will be, you know, will be the big thing this year. You know, it's like Tyrone coming out last year winning the All Ireland and saying, "Oh, we'd only did, you know, 2 collective nights a week." You know, it's until you're successful with it, nobody's actually going to row in and believe it. And like, it's very hard to argue with what Wexford are doing. You know, everything is going to come so fast. I suppose injuries are possibly keeping lads fit, keeping lads fresh, but winning beats all. You know, winning games beats all. It's the best way to get confidence in your manager. It's the best way to have confidence in your players. And I'm sure Darragh would have been thinking that, you know, how are they going to buy into me? Well, they're going to buy into me if we're winning games. You know, so if you have that buy-in, you know, it definitely helps.
Yeah, now this is a bit of a much ado about nothing point, but after Pádraig Mannion went off injured in the first half, TJ Brennan came on, and Galway had 5 of 6 defenders who were left-handers. Don't know if that makes any relevance to anything, but it was just something that stood out to me. Points I did want to make is, with Galway, I thought their forwards looked quite light. Now, obviously, they're trying to introduce some new forwards this year. The likes of Brian Kincannon might be out for the season based on a tweet NUIG said had last week saying long-term injury. Same with Darren Morrissey. So they're down a couple of lads. But like S&C, it looks like some of those boys might need a little bit more. Their forwards just got 2 points from playing the first half. In the last 22 minutes plus injury time of the entire game, they got just a point. They're not working easy scores. Like, everything's coming pretty hard for Galway.
Yeah, and it's the one thing I probably found under O'Neill when he was managing them, is that they were trying to play this kind of game, this running game that every other team is playing. But the players they had didn't really suit it, you know, like Joseph Cooney, Conor Whelan, like even Dahi Burke, Garrod McInerney, they're all very big, physical, strong men. but you wouldn't say legs is their biggest asset.
Mm.
You know, like, and I think that's the one big thing that I think Henry is going to have a big difficulty with, is that, like, these players are still the best players in Galway, but like, how do you develop a game plan that's going to, you know, compete with all these teams who have so much legs? Because these players are the players you're counting on and you're dependent on, and they don't have the ability to play that way. You know, like, so you need to, if you're going to have a spine of them lads, then you need to have legs all around them. And it's not even as if they're doing that, I think, you know. So, like, even your man Hastings, that has kind of been playing a lot with him, he's kind of similar ilk, you know, to all them other players. And like, the days of lumping a ball down and hoping you're going to win it and getting enough scores out of that, you know, you are really going to come unstuck if you're working that hard for scores, because teams are just going to run you, you know, around you and make you do all the defending. And then suddenly, you know, that physicality becomes something different because you don't have the ability to maybe turn them and go back the other way. And I think it is the big problem Henry will have, you know, is that, yeah, he was able to match Limerick physically below on the Gaelic grounds, but, you know, are they really going to be able to do that throughout, you know, 5 round robin games as the weather is improving, you know, and teams are going to be running the ball around you?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Just a reminder, brought to you by ogreretro.com. Use the promo code OurGame and you get 15% off. I'm even wearing one of their Cork jerseys here, which, you know, if they were winning too many All-Irelands, I mightn't necessarily be trying it on. Colin, can I ask you?
Wearing a Cork jersey, huh?
Yeah. Clare beaten Offaly 420 to 16 points. Tony Kelly is back. He scored 212. I noticed John Conlon has reverted to the centre-back spot where he was very good last year. I think there was only a point in between the two teams after 59 minutes. So obviously they kicked on towards the end. I believe Ben Keneally did pretty well on Tony Kelly for a while. But can I ask you, where do you think Clare are at the moment?
Oh, the $1 million question. Listen, I still think we're a good bit behind. I think in terms of maybe the way the game has gone and how we're, you know, transitioning the ball maybe out of defense, I think it, like, our probably from 8 to 15, we're probably as good as what's out there, or, you know, just below it. But like 2 to 7 is probably still Brian's big worry, you know, how we transition the ball out of defense, and our ability to be able to man mark tight, you know, and have that speed. I think Brian is probably still worrying about that. You know, it's probably why John reverted back. It's probably because of his composure on the ball, you know, his physicality, his bit of communication. You know, we've struggled to probably fill 6, 4, and 7, you know, this year already. So, like, I know you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but the options really aren't there, you know, with Clare, you know. And I thought, yeah, listen, John isn't our best option at 6 or at 7, but I think he's certainly better maybe than what we have at the minute, and that's the big worry. You know, we're not developing players to take it. Diarmuid Ryan is obviously a big plus. You know, he's developing into a big, strong, physical man, good striker of the ball. Rory Hayes is probably our man marker. You know, he's probably our tight man marker, good pace. But I still worry that our other 3 are probably a bit behind the 8 ball in terms of, you know, maybe other defences around, and our ability to be able to move the ball comfortably around our defence and deliver it in. But obviously, on the plus side, like, having Tony Kelly back, it was a big plus. You know, you can't man mark him, and having him back to the level he was at yesterday, you know, it was great to see. You know, his scoring ability and stuff is still there. Shane Meehan has been a big plus in the league, you know, getting game time into him. But having leaders around the field, you know, having Tony and John back certainly will help the likes of Shane Meehan and Patrick Crotty, and obviously Peter coming back in. Like, I would even say maybe, you know, could we move Cathal Malone back to field a small bit now that Peter's back? You know, I think Cathal is a is a tyrant back to field. He does an awful lot of donkey work and runs the ball really well, you know, on top of it all, with the ability to get a score. So I think as options are opening up to Brian in the forwards, I think we're possibly going to see a drift of some more players moving back to field. I thought Ryan Taylor, you know, from what I gathered yesterday, was really good. But then Tony opens up so much more space for these players. So, like, they definitely will be better. But I think we don't really know where we're at is the honest answer, until kind of more players come back into the fold and we kind of release more players back and get a better kind of balance to the team. But certainly Peter being back and Tony being back is a massive plus.
Do you think that our two counties, Tipp and Clare, will be fighting it out for the wooden spoon in Munster this year?
Oh, do you know, like, the funny thing about Munster Championship is that, like, yeah, like on paper we probably are the bottom two, you know, in terms of you know, how we're transitioning and maybe probably how we've played the last couple of years. But anybody can beat anybody in that Munster Championship, because all it takes is kind of like, you know, you to have a bad, you know, round one week and then come at it with a real aggression the following week, you know. So like, it is going to be tit for tat. I don't think Waterford are the one thing I would say about Waters is I don't fear them. Obviously, the Ballygunner players coming back in makes them a very different prospect. You know, I think Pádraig Mahoney coming back into the Waterford fold this year will add, you know, a different level to them. But certainly Limerick, obviously not playing as well as they've been playing, is a big help to them as well. Cork were the ones yesterday I was really surprised at. I'm starting to worry already about, you know, what they could do to us again in the championship, because obviously they opened us up in the league, you know, as well a couple of weeks ago. But it's funny, you know, it's Munster Championship. I still think there's going to be no team in the Munster Championship that will lose all games, you know, and then suddenly anything could happen.
Yeah, it's been a tough time for Offaly so far. I think they've conceded an average of about 34 points per game. They've scored 17 per game. So obviously you're losing on average by double scores there. Being in a group of debt didn't make things any easier for them. I think the likes of Owen Cahill played pretty well, John Murphy, even Kelly as well. But, you know, that's tough for them again. Just a couple of other results in the other side of things. Antrim, they nearly beat Watford. Neil McManus had a late penalty tipped over the bar by Sean O'Brien. The goal would have levelled at the point, meant that they lost by 2. Colin Dunford had scored 2 first-half goals for Watford. He was sent off before the break. And just looking at the Watford team here in terms of like how many changes, they would have had Sean O'Brien, Conor Gleeson, Conor Prunty, Irla Daly, Dalton DeBurka and Tom Barron, Darrell Lyons and Jack Fagan in midfield, Montgomery, Gleeson, Foran, Bennett, Kerwin and Dunford. So they would have made a nice few changes there. And it reminds me of Westmeath last year where they made a much changed team. They won that game by 3 points all the while. So to me, they're actually targeting Tipperary next week down in Walsh Park. Liam Cahill against his home county. What do you make of that?
Yeah, like I suppose managers have to target maybe some games in the league where they can kind of go, you know, oh God, we need to get game time into some lads, you know, and stuff like that. But yeah, like especially maybe some of the comments that Liam Cahill made prior to, you know, kind of not taking the job or not making himself available to take the job, you know, I'm sure it wouldn't have pleased the Tipp people. You know, I thought, you know, from an outsider, I thought he got involved in business maybe and said a few things that, you know, if he's not going to take the job, then don't go around saying, you know, oh, you know, things are going to have to change and attitudes are going to have to change in Tipp players. You know, don't throw a grenade under it all, you know, and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm sure Tipp wouldn't have been too pleased with them comments, you know, and Tipp, you can see, the one thing I'll say about Tipp is, like, you know, Bonner is definitely, you know, kind of trying to find a few players and trying to change things and stuff like that. Like, so, like, you see Noel McGrath got game time into him yesterday, John McGrath, Seamus Callanan, you know, I know they're the tried and trusted, but like Jake Morris has played a lot of games. Their backline is kind of is revamped, I suppose, you know, needs necessity, I suppose, with Brendan and Porrick on, like, you know, so like they are finding a few players. I suppose he's had 2 wins out of 3 games, which, you know, kind of keeps him taking over and keeps a bit of confidence going. But certainly, you know, Clare, Tipp, you know, probably even Waterford have an awful lot more players to find, you know, I think, in the remainder of the league, or find a balance in their team, you know, for the remainder of the league.
Yeah, and like, so for anyone who didn't see it, Tipperary lost at home to Dublin 2-16 to 21 points, and goals either side of the half from Fergal Whiteley, from Rian McBride, I should say, the St. Vincent's man, and Ronan Hayes, of course, from Kilmacud Crokes. And the thing that stood out to me, I don't know if you got a chance to see this match, it was on GAA Go, I was down at Temple Stadium, but it just seemed to me that Dublin were creating far more opportunities, especially in the first half. They created 21 scoring opportunities, they scored just 9 of them. Tipp knocked over 10 of 16. So Tipp are very much trying to change the style of play here. Well, the first 2 games would certainly have said that, in the way that they're working the ball through the hands, they're looking for it to pop it off the shoulder, come again and run through the centre and, you know, work those scoring opportunities. Sometimes it worked and looked beautiful against Laois and Kilkenny. Sometimes it didn't look great. And in this game, I thought it was interesting that that game plan seemed to almost disappear. The idea of getting the ball from the half-back line and running it out, it almost disappeared. And I wondered if part of it was, and like, tell me your own insight into teams that you've played in and watched, but changing the two wing backs, where an awful lot of the moves would start from there, I would suggest, and they were both changed. So Dylan Quirk and Barry Heffernan have been getting on the ball constantly and running it upfield in the first two games. They were replaced by Robert Byrne and Ronan Maher, who actually tend to let the ball do more work. Is it possible that explains a lot of why Tipperary didn't seem to play the same way?
Yeah, for sure. Like when you look at Robert Byrne and Ronan Maher, like their ability is their striking ability, and ball winning ability, I suppose. But you wouldn't necessarily call Ronan Maher, a runner. He wouldn't necessarily be running the ball up the field or anything like that. And the same with Robert Byrne. But I'm sure he's like Bonner's trying to find a balance there, with who you're going to play. But like the big difference I found from looking at the Dublin and Tipp game was that like it's just the legs, the athleticism, I suppose, in Dublin too. That they seem to have runners coming from deep. When Rian McBride could end up anywhere. And he kind of he was running at them. Ronan Hayes obviously for the second goal. Took Brian McGrath on the outside. And I suppose maybe the bit of inexperience came in there where, a Tipp player didn't come back and cover the space, as quickly as possible. So they probably have a bit of experience to replace in that back line and how it works as a unit as well. And that's possibly why, obviously Ronan Maher is captain, he's going to be playing, but, and Brian McGrath, they're trying to find, I suppose, players, will Ronan Maher revert back to 3? It's very hard to know. So, only Bonner knows that, but they certainly have a lot to learn about themselves, I think, as a team. And what you often find with a new management coming in is that, they really won't know their game plan that suits the team best, probably until the end of this year, because I don't think you can come in until you really know what players are like in the training ground and how they're going to adapt to situations and how a game plan is going to hold up under pressure too, in a real championship match.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Dublin and their setup in a minute. But first, with Tipperary now, and you have to take into consideration, this was Brian McGrath thrown out there for the first time. We've seen him play mostly for Lockmore at wing-back and maybe the odd time in midfield too. Very good hurler. He was thrown in full-back. You had Owen Connolly, who was in sort of corner-back, full-back line as well. And, I traditionally would have seen him more in the half-back line. But the more I was thinking about it, I was like, there could be as many as 6 players here playing for Tipperary out of position as I would consider it. I think Brian McGrath, you could argue that Paddy Cadell is more suited to half-back than midfield. Owen Connolly, maybe he'd better in the half-back line. Seamus Kennedy was playing number 6, the holding role. I would have said maybe there's a lot of wing backs here, but maybe he could actually also play in the full-back line because he's got that extra speed. Alan Flynn playing midfield, more of a half-back. Michael Breen playing wing forward. I mean, I would have said before, maybe not. So, I mean, if you add all those things up, they're all little things and they're all good players and you have 15 good lads out in the field. But, at some point, if you've got all these players that you suspect are out of position, some lads prefer facing the ball. That's just simply the way it is. Paddy Cadell is very suited to getting the ball, bumping off a lad and running forward with it. When you're midfield, you often have your back to play, so you don't really do that so much. I mean, sometimes that can add up to a lot.
It's nearly something you see at club level, trying to fit like square pegs in round holes, that you'll just try and get your best 15 hurlers on the field. It's very much, for a team to work really well, you need to have lads who'll do that, silly work or dirty work or kind of just positioned to that kind of a situation. But it's definitely, Bonner has a lot, I think, to learn about this group of players, and his management. I think to figure out how they're going to go. It was a bit like probably us in 2013. You had lads like, Cian Dillon, who, no airs and graces about him, but he'd mark everybody, that would come in on him, or Pat O'Connor, who just do his job and find somebody, and you kind of know, how they're going to play and stuff like that. So successful teams will always build them relationships that lads know kind of what their advantages are and what they're not, and work from there. And I think Tipperary are kind of just going through a phase where Bonner's probably just putting his trust in probably the 15 best hurlers and trying to fit them in somewhere, and trying to kind of work it that way. But I think the game has changed so much that, that doesn't work anymore.
No, it certainly doesn't. XDX54 says, Tipp's forward movement worrying Shane. It was. Didn't seem to have any movement for puckouts or try to get in space when backs were working the ball out. New system will take time. There was definitely a huge amount of space in front of the Dublin backline. So Conor Burke sat back at times. He always does that, really good hurler bringing the ball out. But there was huge space. It wasn't really being delivered in. Owen O'Donnell is obviously, a serious athlete back there, and Seamus Callanan's only working his way back in. Paul Flynn has kind of been a little bit hit and miss in the last while. Jason Ford didn't really get into the game. I think, if you take Jake Morris out of it, you're wondering who was providing a real threat the other night, and not really that many players. And you know what? I just want to bring up something here, which is Dublin's formation at times in the game. It wasn't always like this, but this is what I'd refer to. I'm sure other people call it too, the I formation, where you can see players all in pretty much a straight line. So if Dublin work that ball out the field and they're aiming into any of those forwards, they're aiming it into nothing but like 40 yards of space either side. And like that's a great way to, like, I think Dublin are really comfortable year 4 under Matty Kenny. They know how to work the ball around the place, get lads off the shoulder, and that's why they created so many chances against Tipp.
Yeah, for sure. And they probably would have thought that they had the legs against them, like in a lot of ways. So like if they're running out to them spaces, then they're probably, it's going to turn into a leg race or a foot race, and that you're not hitting the ball up maybe as into a 50-50 zone or anything like that. Like, so, but it's one thing that often bothers me, and I feel unfortunate, like, to say it about like a Seamus Callan, but like Seamus Callan is going to stay deep, Seamus Callan doesn't want a foot race, at his age, and he's one of the best hurlers that has ever played the game. But like, how do you fit somebody like that into the team, and how do you like change the dynamic for the way the game is going to play?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you have to get back to work there, Colin, so It's been great having you on, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Cheers, Shane. Thanks a million.
Okay, so that's great to have 2013 All-Ireland winner Colin Ryan on there. Keep the comments coming in. Let us know what you think about everything that's been going on. We're going to talk a little bit of football here now. We've got Fintan O'Toole from the 42, and we also have Martin Carney. Martin, great to have you on. How are things with you?
Good now, not a bother, Shane. Thank you.
Good. And Fintan, yourself, how are you doing?
Well, Shane, how's the form?
Not too bad. Do you know what? Can we get straight to talking about the goalkeeper situation? Martin, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, it didn't work out fully for Rory Beggan in this particular game. The turnover that led to the goal in particular when he was turned over. We saw Ethan Rafferty, who's, a forward playing outfield for Armagh. Like, I was nearly thinking about it. It's a risk-reward situation. It's like, driving up the bus lane for years and accepting that the inevitable €60 fine is going to come, but it's nearly worth it overall.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's madness. Shane,
Really?
I just think it's absolute madness. I mean, Mayo haven't gone near that yet. They have Robbie Henley, certainly he's not a top scorer for them, but a regular scorer. But all of his scores are from free kicks. But it seems between Rory Beggan and Niall Morgan and Ethan Rafferty yesterday, it's a trend at the moment that a lot of inter-county teams have seemed to embrace. But I think after the situation of Monaghan yesterday, when it all kind of blew up in Rory Beggan's face, I have a feeling that a lot of people will reprieve it or will go back on it and actually maybe just say, no, the risks are too great and the rewards are minimal enough. Like, it was quite extraordinary yesterday. I was at the game in Roscommon, between Mayo and Roscommon. Ethan Rafferty again and again into the wind in the second half, took off like a top-class sprinter. It wasn't just kind of ambling up the field like Rory Beggan. He was going at full tilt and joining in the attacks. And towards the end, I think Matty Ruan just lifted his head. On one occasion in particular, there was definitely a goal on had he had a punt from distance, in a little bit like, for example, the way Kerry were able to get their second goal, or Clifford was able to get his second goal with that long ball into the empty area, so to speak.
What do you think, Fintan? Do you think the risk is worth it?
Well, definitely it wasn't for Monaghan yesterday. That's probably the most blatant example in terms of how that game turned around with the 2 goals. And I suppose it's probably most striking that it's kind of one of the pioneers of it that has been caught out. It wasn't someone that's a bit inexperienced. Like the first one, the one that was punted in long towards Clifford, I kind of thought the pass wasn't on initially. I don't know who actually gave it into Beggan, so I think there's a bit of a blame both ways kind of for there. Flip side then is that I know maybe it was hard about stuff, but I actually thought Aaron O'Neill performed quite well for Kildare in kind of relieving the pressure at various times. I'm sure given the circumstances and given they're trying to hold off Dublin and they had the buffer, that goal throughout the game, I'm sure supporters probably were a bit more nervous, especially when he's kind of a bit younger and a bit inexperienced. But yeah, look, I can see the value to it, but I think there's definitely maybe an element of opposition kind of wising up to it now, and there is more of a kind of a press on it. And I thought it was interesting. It wasn't like O'Shea maybe tried, like, obviously he tried to find Clifford, but he did just like punt it, and it was straight away, let's maximize this chance while we can. And obviously he was very, very alert as well for his own goal. So I wonder, was it just looked maybe something that they had discussed beforehand in terms of going up to Inniskeen, and they really, really were trying to capitalise on it.
Yeah, in the game actually against Dublin, Mayo had against Dublin, Robbie Henley tried it, I think, in the 16th minute of the first half, and he just simply lost his bearings completely. Like, Robbie is a goalkeeper out and out, doesn't play outfield with his club, never has played outfield for his club at any level. Whereas like Ethan Rafferty, I think Niall Morgan are regular outfield players with the respective clubs and are comfortable on the ball in outfield situations when they come into contact, so to speak. But certainly what I saw yesterday with Beggan, I think that'll kind of prompt a reappraisal by an awful lot of managers. And I think come summer, okay, you'll see a certain amount of it. You'll see some teams kind of have a belief in it. But personally, I would be totally opposed to it. I'm old-fashioned, I think. A goalkeeper, just stick between the posts, stop them going into the net and get your kick-outs accurate.
Yeah, because it could have gone against Rory Beggan in the Ulster final at Croke Park last summer. Remember when he got back and did that brilliant turnover, but it could have easily been massively expensive for him that day. I know they lost anyway. But Martin, seeing as you mentioned that you were at Mayo's win over Armagh, 15 points to 110, I mean, the way that Mayo refused to panic in that game, like Kieran Mackin got the goal after something like 14 or 15 seconds, bit of a fluke, and Mayo scored the last 5 points of the game. What are you seeing from Mayo this year and in this game?
Well, I've been at all the games as it happens, and in the opening game against Donegal, they were appalling, absolutely appalling in the first half. They were, I think it was 4 or 5 points down at halftime. They should have been 12 points down. Donegal should have had them dead and buried. And again, were it not for a wonderful point from Robbie Henley on the full-time whistle, they would have been beaten. The second game against, against Dublin then? It was either Dublin or Monaghan. They improved somewhat, but I think the big thing that has stood to them this year, their conditioning is excellent, their fitness levels are excellent, but there's a sense of togetherness and collective understanding that has improved actually in the last year or two. The other thing I think that is noticeable is that their substitute bench this year, the gap between the subs and the starting 15 is minimal now. In the past, I often think one of the things that let Mayo down in All-Ireland finals and in big games in the last decade was the fact that the substitute bench was never able to improve matters significantly when they were given the opportunity. You know, you contrast that with Dublin, when Dublin would bring in Owen O'Gara, when they bring in Kevin McMenamin and guys like that. They always seem to kind of up the standard for Dublin. But it's interesting, James Horan has played Aidan O'Shea, Kevin McLaughlin, yesterday Pádraig O'Hara and Paddy Durkin on the subs bench, and when they came in, that four yesterday plus Jack Carney, I thought were outstanding and actually turned the tables on Armagh late in the game, with Durkin getting two of the points, McLaughlin one, and Jack Carney creating 2 of them. So I think the fact that they have had a subs bench this year in their last 3 games that has improved matters when they have been called on, I think that has actually stood to them.
What do you think, Fintan?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, it really just struck me yesterday, the quality of the first 4 subs. I mean, they were all on by half time, but I mean, that's for, okay, maybe O'Hara's coming to the frame a little bit later than the other 3, but the other 3 have been kind of central players for Mayo for the last decade. It does show an incredible quality of reserve. You'd imagine probably all 4 aren't going to be starting on the bench come championship, that a few of them are going to be in the frame to start games, but I guess probably it reminded me a bit of their Monaghan victory in that it's very, very similar kind of a win to dig out, kind of an impressive win. You know, obviously they are technically playing away from home, I suppose, in all these games as well, even though I know they would have had a lot of support there yesterday. So I think they must be really, really happy with how that's going. But at the same time, I think Horan is kind of casting the net and kind of giving, you know, games that I think was Frank Irwin and Sam Callan. That was their first stats yesterday. I know Aidan Norm came on the last year's All-Ireland final, but he seems to be kind of getting more regular game time in this year's league, and that's kind of a springboard, I suppose, from the Knockmore success that he's had over the last couple of years, and he's kind of been a standout forward from what I gather kind of in the club championship and their county wins. So they must be really happy when they've looked at that fixture list and to have 7 points from the first 4 games, and it's really well set up now, I think, for that round 5 match in Tralee on the 12th of March, given probably the top 2 teams in the division so far, I think, 4 rounds in.
Martin, were you very concerned when you saw Tommy Conroy go down for the season? I mean, he's just such a fantastic looking player. And then Aidan O'Shea, I'm starting to wonder, is Aidan O'Shea going to be a starter this year?
Well, just go to the Tommy Conroy incident for openers. I was at that game, actually. I went down that night to Galway to watch the game. I think they were playing Letterkenny in the Sigerson Cup. And I saw the incident happening on the halftime whistle, and I didn't think an awful lot about it. Now, it was under lights. I was at the far side of the ground. I thought this was rather innocuous, but the extent of the injury actually, has been quite devastating from a Mayo point of view, because of all the guys that have come through in recent years, he's the one forward that has genuine pace. A lot of the Mayo players, all of the Mayo players will give you everything. They're skillful, like young Orm, as you talked about, on the back of his campaign with Knockmore this year, got a lot of confidence from that and has carried that through into the county team in the league. But Conroy gave them something extra, and his loss, I think, will be felt as the summer goes on. Aidan O'Shea, just from the word go, he seems to, maybe he's going to have to accept that his role from now on is not going to be as one of the starting 15. Now, how that'll sit with him, I'm not sure. But I know, from what I know of the lad, he'll simply want everything to go for the betterment of the team. And if he sees that, for example, his displays coming off the bench exceed maybe what happens when he starts, he'll probably kind of maybe accept that. But there's no doubt about it. Yesterday, the games that he's played when he's come off the bench, he's playing from the midfield area back towards his full back line. That is his prime area of influence. I always think when he moves forward into the forward line, he slows the game down. He doesn't think as a forward, and he just tends to be ponderous on the ball. Whereas when he's in midfield and playing as an extra halfback, I just think he's wonderful. His presence is great. His tackling ability is second to none. And his ability to influence the rhythm and the tempo of a game, I think, is quite profound from there. And I would say if he is played as a sub, or even if he starts, whichever is going to be the case, it'll be in that role as an extra centre-back. And nothing other than that, actually.
So if those two guys, O'Shea and Conroy, who were in the starting forward last year, do they have the players to step in this year? Because even Ryan O'Donoghue, who I think is quite an exciting player, I thought he had a pretty poor display against Dublin. I didn't think it was his day at all. Now you obviously saw the game yesterday. He scored 1 from play, 7 in total. Can he kick on to that next level again?
Yeah, I think he's a great attitude. I think he's again, I've seen him quite a bit underage all the way up, and he's a guy that has caught my eye, ever since he's a minor. I believe myself he can step up to it. He's extremely competitive. He's accurate, and his free kicking has been steady, has been good. Now the big hope down here, of course, in Mayo is that Cillian O'Connor will make a comeback fairly soon. Now, Cillian O'Connor, what is he, the leading scorer of all times in championship football? That's right across every one of the 32 counties. And his Achilles, we all know what an Achilles tendon injury, it can kind of make a fool of you. You think you're right, and all of a sudden you kind of break down again. But he has been out quite a long time now. I think the game that he got injured was against Clare last year in Ennis, in I think the National League, in a National League match. But if he can come back, and if Jason Doherty can kind of show the form that I think he showed in the Monaghan game, that, I think those two guys would be a big plus to the attack. But I just go back to a point that I made a few moments ago. I still think that the loss of Conroy will be felt as the summer goes on.
Vincent?
Yeah, it's kind of similar enough, I think, to last year's Mayo story when you're looking at the attack. I think that injury is just going to cloud things for a long time. Ultimately, for a lot of the year, I would have thought, I was impressed with how they were coping without Cillian O'Connor. I thought Wayne O'Donoghue was really stepping up to the free-taking responsibilities. He was showing great leadership there. And then Conroy was so exciting to watch. The way he just took charge of that All-Ireland semi-final, particularly in extra time. Dublin couldn't handle him, it was just that kind of raw, explosive pace he had. But ultimately, I think when it came to the All-Ireland final, that was the day when we kind of realised that they did miss O'Connor, just that kind of experience and that extra scoring touch, maybe, kind of composure to finish one of the goal chances. So you just wonder then, okay, you've no Conroy this year, you have O'Donoghue. Is it asking a lot for O'Connor and Doherty, given the injury problems that they've both had, that Mayo really, really need them to step up? or is it too big an ask to expect like an Aidan Orme to really come into the fray very, very quickly, or Frank Irwin? This is only his first year. So I wonder, is the onus going to come on Ryan O'Donoghue even more from that point of view? Now, I've been really impressed with him. Just even like, I know it's kind of a small little metric, and I know it's not the big thing, but just what he did in his club Belmullet, who didn't really have a great track record in the club championship over the last few years at senior level in terms of getting to finals, but just watching some of the footage and reading reports, like he just seemed to carry his All-Ireland form, getting the Ireland final really into that, and he seems to kind of just become that kind of real leader. And I just love the way he sticks at it. Like, if things don't go his way, take the penalty against Tyrone and missed All-Ireland final, he still nails a couple of frees after that. You mentioned the Dublin game, agree with you on that, but he was still there in the second half, and I think he set up one or two kind of crucial points at the end. So I mean, and then further back the pitch, I think there's just a lot of signs of encouragement for Mayo. Like, I think if there's a very prominent league player award at the moment, I think Dermot O'Connor's got to be right up there. I think he seems really, really influential. Kind of what I've seen around the middle third. Interesting then from a Mayo point of view, what's his best position? Where does he best benefit the team? Is it the half forward line, or is he the midfielder alongside Matthew Rowan, or and then obviously further back then, look, the fact that they've Oisin Mullen has stayed, and I mean, we mentioned injuries, like when Owen McLaughlin went down in the Monaghan game, I thought, it looked like that the injury curse had kind of struck them again, and it was really a really significant blow. And then it was kind of out of nowhere. I was watching the Sigerson Cup, and he was kind of a late inclusion for UL in the final, so I think that's a big boost for them that they have them. So I'd say 1 to 12 in a very, very good shape, and it's maybe just that final couple of missing pieces to just try and figure out the inside line because of the Conroy absence. What role O'Connor and Doherty will have as the year goes on.
Martin, we'll talk about Dublin in a couple of minutes. Obviously, another defeat for them. But if we're to just take it as granted that it's a pretty wide open All-Ireland race this year, what you've seen of Armagh so far, do you see them as a team that can go deep into the championship?
I think they can have a good run the championship. Is it Fermanagh they're playing in the first round? I think in a few weeks.
I'll look that up in a second.
Yeah, in 8 weeks' time. I think they'll be, they'll be building everything towards that. What struck me yesterday about them, most of the game they played everybody inside their own 45-metre line, and then broke in groups, broke in clusters with great speed. I just feel if they had trusted their full forward line a little bit more. Rian O'Neill is an outstanding player, and alongside him he had I think Nugent and Duffy. I felt myself had there been a little bit more faith placed in them, and a little bit more ball given to them, and a little bit more emphasis on their attacking game, I feel myself that they could have gone on and actually won it. I just read in one of the papers this morning, Kieran McGeeney was very disappointed at the amount of ball they turned over as the game went on, late in the game in particular. But I just sensed myself that had he encouraged maybe a little bit more attacking kind of more of attacking dimension to the game, I feel that they could have actually done much better. And I do think that he will get that balance right in time for the championship. But if you were to take, for example, in Ulster, I think the dark horse of all of them at the moment is Derry. Like Derry have had four wins, I think, on the trot. They, again, Conor Glass is back. Didn't he come back from Australia? And Rory Gallagher just seems to have them in pretty rude form at the moment. And just watch them. I think they're going to actually cause quite a bit of, they'll turn a few heads this year, I think.
Yeah, I noticed Joanne Cantwell saying last night they've actually won 11 league games in a row. If you go back to last year, their scoring differential from 4 games is plus 37. So that's very, very impressive. Just as you mentioned, the 2022 draw for Ulster, Donegal are against Armagh, and the winner will play Antrim or Cavan in the next round there. Do you have any thoughts on Armagh Finton after the weekend?
I just think it's a defeat, but I just don't think it's a massive grave setback. I just think in the overall picture they're in a very, very good place. It's probably a good time to be taking stock now. 4 rounds in, you have a good bank of games to kind of judge a team, and kind of good evidence. I mean, they're third on the table, just ahead of Donegal. Okay, they lost again by 2 points, but just the goal scoring stats I just think are interesting to look at. They've only conceded 1 goal so far in their 4 games to date, and obviously Kerry are the only other side with that, and they're joint top goal scorers with Kerry with 6. Obviously, the 10 points is probably the thing that hurts them there. But I mean, in terms of coming up against I suppose a kind of a seasoned Mayo team, and the fact that Mayo kicked the last 5 points, and go back to what we spoke about at the start of the conversation, with that strength off the bench just seemed to tell in terms of kind of Mayo having a kind of more powerful kick. But I think Armagh probably one of the sides in Division 1 that has to be very, very happy with kind of how things have gone for them. so far. And if you think that last year, I know it's not quite as comparable because it was the north-south split, but they were in a relegation playoff. They managed to just avoid the relegation playoff. It was Monaghan we're stuck in it, So I don't think they're going to have any of those kind of fears at the moment. And obviously, there's bigger name counties that will turn to that are kind of in more in danger of the tractor at the moment with only 3 rounds to go.
Martin, as you watch Dublin, they've gone 200 and I think it's 10 games now since their last competitive victory, which was in the Leinster Championship last year, losing this time to Kildare, 112 to 12 points. What are you thinking when you're seeing this Dublin team and the way things are playing out for them?
Well, I think there's been an awful lot of hanging and flogging brigade out there, kind of being pretty hard. And there was always going to be this period of transition that they were going to have to engage with and endure. They were going to always have to bring in new faces to actually compensate for the quality that had departed. And you go back to look at their underage over the last number of years. I think, if I'm right now on this, Kildare and Meath, I think, have won, I think between them, 6 of the last 7 Leinster minor titles. And I think Dublin have only won 1. And I don't think Desi Farrell has the quality coming through, for example, that maybe Jim Gavin had to work with. And I just think he needs to be given time. At the end of the day, Shane, when you think about it, he's won 2 Leinster titles. He's managed Dublin to win 2 Leinster titles. He has also managed Dublin to win an All-Ireland. And he's in the process now of actually trying to cobble together a new team. A lot of the more experienced lads, I think, are playing from memory rather than from, with any great conviction right now. But I do think that if they can get their heads right and if they can rediscover this competitive gene within themselves, I still think they're going to be formidable this summer. And I wouldn't be out there kind of looking for blood if I were a Dublin man or woman right now.
Yeah, Colin Gooch Cooper was saying it is retrievable. So I'm wondering, to what degree is it retrievable? What does that mean? James McCarthy can come back, Owen Merchant can come back, Con O'Callaghan, there's probably someone else I'm forgetting there. To what degree do you think is it retrievable?
Well, it's retrievable in the sense that, I'm not so sure if they'll be able to retrieve the bad start that they have made in the league. And again, that's no big deal. I think Mayo were the longest surviving team in the National League until 2020, when they got relegated for a year. And it did them no harm to go down a division and maybe just, introduce new faces and get guys use the pace of intercounty football at a lower division. And I feel if that is to be the case with Dublin next year, it's not the end of the world. I don't think they'll be down there, for any long time or such. But there is no doubt about it at the moment that the quality that they had over a period of time, you always knew that the Dermot Connolly, the Brogan brothers, Kevin McMenamin, Owen O'Gara, all of those guys would give you, loads of scoring options up front. Those scoring options aren't there right now. And basically that is, and even Dean Rock, who, we know is so accurate, he just doesn't seem to have that competitive spark in him at the moment. But I think come championship, that's when you will see them retrieving some of the ground they have lost up to now. And I wouldn't despair if I were a Dublin fan, even though the league start has been, pretty lamentable.
Yeah, I mean, Fenton, if you look at it this way, Brian Fenton did have a chance for a goal early on. Very good save from Aaron O'Neill. So they worked a nice move there. Dean Rock also missed an early goal chance. They worked that pretty well. Brian Howard had that late chance after Aaron O'Neill got caught under the high ball from Sean Bugler. The game could have easily gone the other way. Kildare only won it by a goal.
Yeah, look, it was very, very fine margins with those goal chances, especially when you think of how Kildare's goal happened, that the ball just fell for Jimmy Hyland and he managed to get it over the line. But it's just unusual to see Dublin not kind of finishing those chances, I mean, they were the masters basically at goals where, it was this kind of necklace of passes and then it would come into someone like Niall Scully or Rock at the back post. You think of how many times you saw it in Croke Park and they would be finishing. It just seemed kind of amazing. I suppose we're judging them at their unbelievably high standards of the last decade, that they did manage to hit the net yesterday. And that is just hurting them, I suppose, that final kind of scoring touch. Because in fairness, I did think there were signs that the approach work was a lot better and that defensively they were better yesterday than this was how open they had been, particularly maybe in the Mayo game when Mayo got those 2 goals, and obviously with the damage that Rian O'Neill had caused in the first Armagh game. I mean, team selection wise, there was probably encouraging signs for Dublin yesterday with the familiarity that Johnny Cooper started, like Robbie McDade came off the bench, Killian O'Shea came on as a late one from Kilmacud. I'm wondering will a couple of more of those Kilmacud guys get a run? I mean, a couple of them were involved with Desi in 2017 when they won under 21, so they're not as young and raw physically, and a couple of them have been around O'Byrne Cup and leagues. I'm just wondering, are those the kind of players that you might have to start looking for now to beef up this squad a bit? But like the other element as well is that, like, I think, like we spoke last week, Shane, I suppose, about Kildare, this nearly men tag, you know, like a very, very spirited display against Tyrone, but they came away with nothing. There's almost an element like if they weren't going to beat Dublin yesterday at home, when were they going to beat them? You know, given I suppose the Dublin just slightly alien at the moment in the league, and you know, just watching TV, I thought it was very obvious that it was a pretty raucous atmosphere there. And the celebrations afterwards were quite interesting. I think they're understandable, but for a late February league game, like the one person that caught my eye actually was when the camera showed him was Johnny Doyle, who, judging by his hands, seemed to be kind of telling everyone else to maybe just calm down a little bit, you know, that it is only the end of February, you know, we'll see what happens when they meet them in Leinster. But I did think it would look, in fairness to them, they've been kind of under Dublin's rule for the guts of a decade. I can understand the kind of emotion that came out. But, you know, I just thought that was interesting when it did kind of cut the Doyle at one stage at the final whistle.
Yeah, I mean, first win in 22 years over Dublin. I totally understand being really excited and really joyful after it. I just think I got a lot of flack on Twitter for this, Martin. I was just saying, the guy who brought out the massive flag and was waving it around the field, I thought they could have done without that, as in the players obviously didn't do it, but they could have done without that, because I think if Dublin are going to meet Kildare and Leinster, what will be talked about from now until then is these lads think they can plant a flag and make fools of us down in Newbridge. I honestly think that would be used as a motivation.
It'll be used as motivation. It'll give them fodder, actually, when they play Kildare later in the year. But no, I can understand Kildare's joy. You know, it's a very intimate venue, a very, very closed venue. It's a venue that lends itself to a great atmosphere. And the fact that Kildare yesterday, as you said, got the better of Dublin for the first time, was it in 20 years? I mean, it was cause for celebration. It's a little bit like watching Arsenal in the last few weeks winning games in the Premiership. They have celebrated the 2 wins against Leeds, for example, as if they had won the Premiership. And Kildare yesterday, I can understand the euphoria, I can understand the joy. Well, wait a minute. The championship is for the big boys. The championship is that really kind of decides matters one way or the other. And I think Dublin yesterday will be reminded and will remind themselves of the way Kildare actually kind of celebrated that victory at the end. And Fintan is perfectly right. There was fine margins yesterday. Those goaling chances at the beginning, at the end of the game, had they gone in for Dublin. And remember, the Kildare goal was, I think, what word would we use? It was fortuitous. Somewhat, you know, it was Mick Fitzsimons made a good save, and again it was flicked into the net. Those little kind of things had gone the opposite way. It was a Dublin win.
Has that done much for Kildare, do you reckon, though, in terms of belief, Martin, and also even just for the other teams in Leinster?
Of course it has. I think it has to be good for Kildare. Kildare, like, have a, you know, management of Anthony Rainbow and Glenn Ryan, great Kildare men. You know, they're trying to kind of create a pride and a sense of togetherness and a sense of, you know, ambition with these players. And like when you look at the counties around Dublin at the moment, the likes of Kildare and the likes of Meath, like, there is no issue with population, there is no issue with money, there is no issue with in terms of tradition. And like, I mean, they should be better than what they have been over a long period of time. But as I said earlier, those victories that they have had in the last 6 or 7 years at Leinster minor level, I think that is going to maybe bear fruit in the short term. And maybe we will see them. We need to see them if the Leinster Championship is to have any credibility. We need to see those 2 counties, Meath and Kildare, much more competitive this summer than has been the case for far too long.
Yeah, Fintan?
Yeah, the other thing I was just going to touch on actually with Dublin, it was just interesting actually to just reflect last week and compare to Eamon Fitzmaurice's first year in charge of Kerry 2013, when they lost their first 4 opening league games and they looked in complete disarray. I think they only scored 4 or 5 points up in Castlebar against Mayo. I know Martin might remember that game, but they were kind of well beaten anyway. And there was this big crisis, I think, in the middle of that spring in Kerry. And as the championship turned out, they obviously won Munster again, and they ran Dublin very close in what was one of the great classic All-Ireland football semi-finals. So, it is, I think they've definitely come back to the pack. There's no doubt about that. It is quite interesting, I suppose, how quickly it's happened. But I suppose there's an element as well from Kildare's point of view. Dublin have a target on their back. They were the greatest side, and how much it means to these sides to kind of beat a big team like that. And maybe there's an element of that as well. Donegal, Tyrone on Saturday night. Tyrone now are the All-Ireland champions. I think one of their players had that phrase that we are now the hunted rather than the hunters over the winter. And how will we cope on that? And I thought from a Donegal point of view, I was at the game in Killarney. Didn't think they were very impressive in that game. I know the weather was very, very poor. For a lot of the first half on Saturday night, they weren't really good, and Tyrone were kind of dictating the match. Right. But I thought, obviously, Conor O'Donnell's emergence has been brilliant for them. But I just thought the intervention of Paddy McBrearty, you want your marquee guy to step up. Okay, Murphy's off the pitch. He's not involved at the moment. Michael Langan isn't there as well, for example. But it didn't really look on, I thought, that goal. But McBrearty really just completely made it against a packed defence. And then, in fairness, Donegal just took off in the second half. Different guys thought Peadar Mogan was making a lot of big incisions. Obviously, McKelvey gets the goal. O'Donnell, who I've mentioned, Oisín Gallen off the bench. And it just feels that they were really fired up for that second half. Now, I know they're near neighbours, and I know Donegal Tyrone is a big thing anyway, and they beat them in last year's championship. But just that sense of, we've seen it in hurling with Limerick as well, that you can't beat, I suppose, maybe that bit of motivation for a team, what a big league win can do, because they are the benchmark to run at the moment.
Yeah, but just going back to that game, actually, what I was delighted to see from a Donegal point of view is, with the exception of Paddy McBrearty, all the other players were under 30 years of age. There's a young fella, Peadar Mogan, I think he was playing centre half forward. He was the guy that put McBrearty in space before McBrearty gave the pass for O'Donnell's goal just on the halftime whistle. And again, at the end, when he set up Jake McKelvey for his goal, or when Jake McKelvey got his goal, rather, it was Mogan that actually set that up. Again, I saw him in Sigerson this year in live and in living colour, so to speak, and was hugely impressed at his versatility. He can play defensively, he can play good as an attacker, but he's great awareness of what's around him. And I think that's a great asset in the player. He's not so much kind of concerned with his own game as bringing others into it. And I thought, when you think of Donegal in general, the young O'Donnell lad who got a goal in 3 the other night, he's from Carndonagh. I remember a time when there wasn't a Gaelic football club in Carndonagh, where soccer was the only game played in the Inishowen Peninsula. Now you have kind of Caolan McGonigal, I think, is a Buncrana lad. You have Carndonagh lads. And it's fabulous to see areas that hadn't got a tradition, shall we say, in Gaelic football as such, kind of now being very central to the whole kind of push, for the county team in Donegal right now. And to have done this without Michael Murphy, to have done it without Michael Langan the other night, believe you me, that's a huge boost to their confidence, and I think it'll stand to them as the year goes on.
Martin, how important is the fitness of Oisín Gallen? He's obviously been dogged by injury, but you can see him when he picks up the ball, he just looks like he's just that different level of class. The other night, he has that little extra dimension. But again, as you said, he's been plagued with injuries. He's just found it so difficult to kind of get a run, shall we say, influence, bring his influence to bear to the extent that it should have been had he not been injured. And I think it's important from their point of view that he is right for the summer, that he is right, and that Murphy is right, obviously. But the guy also that I think, again, somewhat undervalued in many ways, is Michael Langan. His ability to kick scores from play, I think, is second to none. In Donegal, there's an obsession at club level in playing short hand passing, a short hand passing game that goes right across the board. And I sometimes think when they bring that into the county, they forget that the kicking dimension is equally important. And I thought the last night they got the blend. You remember, Fintan, you were down a week ago in Killarney. They wouldn't let the ball go by foot at all. It was all kind of playing, my own phrase, ring-a-rosy football, going around in circles, going nowhere. But nobody trusting their kicking game, nobody trusting their inside line. Whereas the last night, they did trust their inside line. They let an awful lot of kick ball through, and they reaped the dividends, so to speak. Fintan?
Yeah, the other one actually I mentioned on the injury front there actually is as you talked about Colin Ryan from Buncrana. Like, it was interesting. Declan Bonner looked pretty downcast after the Kerry game when he was talking about his absence. He read him Donegal's most consistent player of the last couple of seasons. So I think they're hoping that injury seemed a bit worse than they first thought that he picked up against Clare. So he's another guy, if you get back into it, that's kind of a more formidable championship squad. But yeah, I couldn't agree more in terms of like they were. Didn't think they were too bad in the first half against Kerry in terms of kind of being patient against what was a very, very strong wind. Yeah. But just in the second half, they were just so slow and ponderous around the middle. And maybe it was a reflection on Tyrone's defending, but just the gap seemed to open up far quicker in the second half the last day. Like the Oisín Gallen point, once he kind of skipped inside, I think it was Pádraig Hampsey, the whole thing opened up for him and he went straight through and clipped over a very nice point. There was a couple of others during the second half. I really liked Morgan, the fact that he really went for the jugular in terms of fisting it across, because the most easiest thing to do when he was coming in from the side, I thought watching it, is that put this over the bar and it's a 2-point lead and just try and defend it. But he saw there was a guy inside McKelvey. I think there was actually another person on his shoulder and he said, look, let's just put this game to bed. And then obviously it was kind of safe from there in terms of kind of finishing the game off. So the other thing that they did quite effectively was, I think, Ryan McHugh's positioning. Maybe not in terms of him impacting on the game, but it seemed to neutralise Conor Myler's impact more in the second half, because I thought in the first half he was carrying a lot of ball forward. He was kind of creating a lot of the gaps. And they also just seemed to get on top in midfield as well. Like, I thought, if you think back to the second goal that Tyrone got against Mayo in last year's All-Ireland final, the long kick-out that was won by Colin Kilpatrick, they were trying that move on a couple of occasions in the first half to Kilpatrick or Kennedy, and then someone would go through. Now maybe Donegal a little bit fortunate that Tyrone were pretty wayward in terms of a couple of really good goal chances in the first half. Like Kilpatrick, after scoring a really good one the week before against Kildare, hit a poor connection after the thing had opened up for him that went wide, and then actually he was the guy on the end of another move and he blasted it over the bar. So, but then look, you make your own luck, you're within touching distance at half time, and then suddenly out of nowhere through the McBurty O'Donnell kind of access, you create a goal. And I imagine Tyrone going in at half-time probably wondering how that they were at level. And then versus Donegal, they capitalised on it and they took their chance. And I think both them and Kildare probably the big winners from the Division 1 action over the weekend in terms of big responses to disappointments the previous week and getting big victories under their belts.
Martin, where do you think Tyrone are at? I mean, last week they got that victory over Kildare, but Kildare were in a good position to win that game, just didn't see it out. And obviously they had a nice lead here, 7 points to 3, and then end up losing.
I'm not so sure where they're at the moment, actually. I'd say their managers, Brian Dooher and Fergal Logan, will be equally a little bit kind of concerned about it. Like, when you look at it, when they won the All-Ireland last year, immediately, I think, or within a number of weeks, 4 of their players had retired or, just put the intercounty scene behind them. And I just think at the moment they're struggling to find a consistency. Like, Tyrone teams, of all the teams, there's an abrasiveness about them. There's a contrariness about them. And yet there's always a very creative side to them. Now, the other night it was noticeable that Derek Canavan, when he got on the ball, in particular in the first half, caused consternation in the Tyrone or in the Donegal defence. But at the other side of the field, that what I call contrariness and just abrasiveness that Tyrone teams have, I haven't seen it this year. And unless they get that, Tyrone are going to struggle somewhat, because of all the teams, anybody who's played Ulster football will tell you, of all the teams that you dislike most playing against, Tyrone topped the list, because they're always awkward, they were contrary, they were highly, highly competitive, and they could make life a misery for you. But one of the constants with them is they always had tight marking defenses. They were never the biggest of teams, for example, but by Jesus, they would put you to the pin of your collar in terms of giving you grief for a full 70 minutes if that was needed to win, and that's not there at the moment.
So if we're to look at the other Division 1 game, Kerry went up to Inniskeen and won by 3-14 to 1-12 against Monaghan. Rory Beggan obviously had a couple of mistakes there. Probably maybe should have been able to cut out the first one that David Clifford finished. Obviously, there was the turnover for the other one. But Fintan, what did you make of Kerry? What are you making of Monaghan?
I think Kerry are probably the most impressive side all round. Probably in the division far, maybe just slightly shading it with Mayo. But I think it's been a pretty strong start for Jack O'Connor. he said last week that they have winning the league is not a priority for them in the slightest, but I think it may end up being the thing that they do, and like he's actually done it in both of his previous eras in charge. In his first season, he's managed to win the league. Probably falls nicely for them, I think, in football. You probably touched on this earlier, Shane, with the hurling, but like the fact that the hurling league, there's only a 2-week window between the start of the championship and final. They Kerry will have 5 weeks from the league final to win their play Cork. It's a semi-final game that they'd be heavily favoured, and you'd expect them to win. So I think they're looking to get a lot out of this. They're facing up into different types of challenges. The fact that they win at home in tough conditions against Donegal, and on a tough Saturday night against Dublin, then they go up to Inniskeen and they win with a bit of grace, a bit of swagger to them in terms of the goals that the Clifford O'Shea have got. I think definitely the positioning of the two of them, and O'Shea in particular in his best position at 11, having played a bit of 14 last year, having out of necessity played midfield for the first league game against Kerry. I think you see it yesterday. They get 3-5 between them for the 3-14, and I just think they have a brilliant partnership between them. For all the plaudits that Clifford gets, they ultimately have two generational talents that have come along at once for them, I think, in terms of the ability of the two of them. I think if there's question marks over kind of all the leading All-Ireland contenders, and if it seems a pretty even race, maybe at the moment Kerry are slightly ahead. And I suppose the one final thing I would say in terms of their defensive approach, just the thing I've noticed is I just think Tyke Morley seems to be the key to it. He's basically playing what I would think is kind of similar to the role Cian O'Sullivan played for Dublin. It's not an out-and-out sweeper role, but when they lose the ball or when the opposition are attacking, he is keen to get back and kind of patrol that D. And then he has, I suppose, the likes of Diarmuid O'Connor. I think keeping him fit will be a big thing this year. And I think I'd expect him to kind of be having more of an influence in midfield as opposed to maybe wing forward roles in the past. I think he's kind of covering, and then Jack Barry alongside him, maybe if David Moran gets back. But it's interesting that they're not really experimenting much in their team. I mean, like the guys they brought into the squad, say Dan O'Donoghue, who's a new guy, he's actually 26 this year. Jack Savage has come back into it. He's in his mid-20s. Greg Horne's in his mid-20s. I'm surmising that the management are looking at it and saying, this is our best hope of winning the All-Ireland. We don't need to rip up the script here. We just need to tweak a couple of things. And yeah, they look like a team that are kind of going all out from the very, very start. Yeah, and then you look at like Gavin White, he's out, just a short-term injury. I think Stephen Okunbo, he won't be out for too much longer. He got injured playing for the club. David Moran probably be back in the short term too. Martin, do you think that this Kerry team, have you seen anything new from Kerry this year that would suggest that they've kicked on from last year?
Well, I just see that they defensively, they're, yesterday in Inniskeen, their ability to get a cluster of players around a threatening Monaghan player was quite noticeable on a number of occasions. Jack O'Connor seems to have tried to kind of up the ante in terms of their tackling and in terms of collectively forcing errors into the opposition. On top of that, I think primarily that's the main thing I've seen with them is just that extra aggression that's in their defensive approach. I think at midfield, Diarmuid O'Connor is playing exceptionally well for them. But up front, you have to say, the Clifford brothers, I think have just been outstanding up to now. As you said, it's once a generation. You get the likes of David Clifford coming around. But I just get a sense this year, Jack O'Connor sees maybe the season ends in July. It's only a couple of more months to go. And forget the experimentation. He's simply just trying to kind of get his team together as quickly as possible. And I just see at the moment, if you were to kind of, shall we say, label a favourite for the All-Ireland this year, on the evidence of their displays so far, Kerry are certainly way ahead of the pack. And it will be an interesting game, in Tralee on Saturday week when they play Mayo. But I just think in current form, they're carrying too much. They're just carrying too much ability and carrying too much understanding of that collective understanding that actually sets them apart from all others. And I just think they are the favourites. They are the out-and-out favourites at this stage, even though it's only February.
But do they have the steel and the bit of ignorance that you need to, the likes that maybe carried Tyrone across the line?
Well, that's true. That's the point I made about their defending. Their defending is so more aggressive than it has been in the last number of years. Like, I mean, I think the criticism
is that Paddy
of
Talley or is that Jack O'Connor? Like, because he talked about they had a bit of a record going in terms of not conceding goals until this weekend.
Yeah, and I think that's why he was disappointed maybe at conceding the goal at the very, very end of it. That I just saw the interview last night that he did in the Sunday game. And I found it strange. Like, here they were after winning by 3-14 to 112. And one of the things that he highlighted was the fact that they conceded a goal later on. You know, I just said to myself, get lost, will you? You know, no, look at there. Of all the teams, they play exciting football. And when you have, as I said, the Clifford brothers up front, when you have, the way Sean O'Shea is playing from centre half forward at the moment. I mean, there's a trio of players on any given day. If they hit their best form, they'll make life a misery for any team. And the way also we have seen this year that they are varying their game. They're well capable of kind of flooding their own defence with numbers if that's necessary, but also they're breaking out from defence and their ability then to actually take scores second to none.
Yeah, I'll just run through a couple of the scores from the other divisions here and just throw it back at you then to see if there's any points you want to make in any other teams. Division 2, Clare, they lost at home to Derry, 10 points to 2-13. Offaly drew with Meath, 1-10 apiece. Galway beat your Cork Finton 3-22 to 2-17. Roscommon were very impressive against Down, 1-18 to 10 points in Park Esler. Very, very easy, and the Rossies could have scored a bit more. Division 3 then, Longford, they lost at home to Fermanagh. Louth beat Westmeath, Limerick beat Wicklow, and Laois drew at Antrim. Division 4, I saw Tipperary beat Sligo down in Thurles. Very good performance there. Wexford won away in London. Cavan, they lost at home to Carlow, and Watford, they had a defeat to Leitrim. So is there any county in particular sticking out there that we haven't really talked about, Fintan, or any performance that you were taken by?
Just the gap in Division 2, Shane, stood out for me again. I mean, I can't remember the last time the second tier was a split. I mean, like, the beatings handed it over the weekend. Like, we had said Galway and Derry and Roscommon are probably at the start of the league were going to be the front runners, but they're really showing that. I mean, very impressive to Derry to go down to Ennis, which has been a place where a lot of counties have struggled over the past couple of seasons, and to win by 9 points pretty comfortably in the second half. Obviously, Galway put up a huge score on Cork, and you have to factor in as well, Cork are 1-1 kind of an injury time. Galway had really taken control of that game. Once Sean Meehan went off injured, it seems like Cork's defence just kind of collapsed, and Shane Walsh in particular kind of ran riot, and Galway seemed to have a lot of attacking options further back. Probably conceding so much was probably an issue for them, and obviously Roscommon scored 118, and it's just interesting, like, if you look at it, that like Derry 8 points, Roscommon 7, Galway 6, but then the scoring differences, like Derry are plus 37, Roscommon plus 21, Galway plus 25, and then the flip side, Offaly, Cork and Down are all minus 20 or worse off at the bottom of the table. Like, there's just such a big gulf that I didn't think was going to be as great in this division, and I can't think of any other time in the recent seasons where it has been as pronounced in second division. And just with the Talton Cup factor, it just makes it, the stakes are going to be so high over the next couple of weeks. Like, I don't think Meath, like, probably the last couple of weeks, they've drawn twice against their relegation rivals now, Offaly and Down. I don't think either results probably did them much good, in terms of trying to get a win out of one of those games. Fair play, I suppose, the fact that it looked like they were destined for a defeat in Tullamore, but they managed to get a goal in the 75th minute to kind of draw level there. But, like, next time out now, it's interesting. Meath are home to Cork on Sunday the 13th, and Offaly are playing Down on Saturday the 12th. And again, in the consequence of the Sam Maguire Talton Cup, I mean, those games could be absolutely pivotal. And then, like, Derry, Roscommon, Galway, I think they all have to play each other as well. So the prize is pretty great there. But I mean, like, if Derry do manage to do it, I think that's going to be pretty remarkable for a team that contested the Division 1 league final in 2014, then went all the way down to Division 4, and to be all the way back up to Division 1 potentially by 2023 is quite a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Martin, is there any of those points you want to pick up, or even just the green plan in terms of, like, the championship structure that's going to be in from 2023, and your thoughts on that?
Well, no, just basically going back to Division 2, what Phil was talking about, like, Derry haven't conceded a goal in any of their 4 games. Like, defensively, they've been very, very solid. And you say their score difference is at plus 37. The thing of the Talton Cup, like next year for Division 3 and Division 4 teams, what's the reality is this, that you're going to have 2 from, I would imagine, Meath, Offaly, Cork or Down in Division 3 next year. And that's quite remarkable. Like, I mean, of the last, was it 35 All-Irelands or something that have been won, like Cork Down, and Meath have been kind of winners in those. So, there's high stakes here. The other thing about them also is that the teams that had their games postponed due to Hurricane Franklin a week ago have to play next weekend. So you're going to have the likes of Offaly playing 5 weekends in a row. And they have, they're in enough trouble at the moment with injuries. Like there are concussion injuries. There are there's 2 guys out with concussion. There's other lads have different injuries. And with a shallow enough panel, with a kind of they're going to find it very, very difficult to kind of garner enough points as the kind of season goes on, with the fact that they're going to inevitably pick up a few injuries in those 5 successive weekends.
And Martin, are you happy to see the Green Plan come through in terms of the reform of the championship structure?
I didn't give it a lot of thought, Shane, to be honest with you, but from what I've read of it, I think there's a bit of details still to be teased out in it. From the beginning, I was always reluctant to see the provincial championships, shall we say, relegated in importance. And, which would have been the proposal last year that a lot of people are hoping to get, was that everything in the championship would be based on your league, shall we say, positioning. But to me, that was relegating the provincial championships into second place. And I think since the foundation of the GA, it has been the life's blood of Gaelic sport. And I'm just glad to see that they are still very much part of the new championship structure.
Yeah, Fintan, I did an explainer video on it, and I was wondering by the end of it if I actually made this any clearer, because like Martin said, there's an awful lot of detail in it. All the provincial finalists get through, and then the best placed league teams after that. And, from 2024, the Tailteann Cup winner will also be guaranteed a place in there. Are you happy to see this through? It was 94.7%, I think, passed it in Congress.
Yeah, look, I think it's a stepping stone to something better. Look, personally, I'm just not sure about the provincial system really anymore, given the way it's gone in a couple of provinces over the last couple of years. I think aside from Ulster, and in fairness, I think the Mayo, Galway, Roscommon triumvirate have made Connacht pretty competitive. But I don't know what's the absolute perfect solution, but just the issue with kind of Munster and Leinster is a problem for the GA to kind of tackle. And in fairness as well, some of the kind of mismatches that we've seen in the GA qualifiers kind of develop. I think this is a kind of an effort to kind of enliven the All-Ireland series. In fairness, I can agree with you in terms of these things can be pretty convoluted and complicated. And I felt a little bit of the debate about it beforehand. There was such attention and focus on what happened at the Special Congress last year, and no change happened, that this crept in a little bit more below the radar. Obviously, the fact that I suppose the matches had returned as well. I think in the off-season when that Special Congress was being debated and that was a bit more revolutionary, I think was probably going to kind of garner a bit more of a debate. But one thing I've always kind of thought in terms of, I don't know, is there any chance of it going to happen? But I will go back to the 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B format in the league. I think that's one of the biggest issues in terms of, to me, the teams that are regularly appearing in Division 1 are kind of streaking further and further clear of the rest. And even someone like Roscommon, who it's almost like every second year they're in Division 1 at this stage, but they're still getting exposed to enough kind of top-ranking competitive football that I think it's making a difference. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of root causes in the imbalance at the moment.
Okay. Well, do you want to make any final point on that, Martin?
No, I'll tell you, Shane, I have apologies, but I have to run. I have to collect the kid from school.
Well, look, it was brilliant to have you on. Really appreciate you having it. And hopefully we'll be chatting again soon.
Appreciate it, Shane. Cheers.
Okay, brilliant to have Martin Carney on there. Fintan, there was a couple of things in terms of hurling that I didn't quite get to before I finished up there with Colin Ryan. Number one, though, you are a Cork man.
I just want to jump in. Actually, one other football point I just wanted to make is just to give one shout out to. I saw unbelievable praise being handed out to 2 kind of lower forwards over the weekend. So Sam Mulroy getting 11 points, 11 frees after getting the winner for Limerick last weekend. Mickey Hart absolutely raving about him afterwards. And then Keith Byrne, 12 points, 7 from play for Leitrim. I think, like Andy Owen was saying, he might have been footballer of the year, but he was absolutely gushing in his praise of him being able to kick off both feet. First, John Heston scored 110 in defeat for Westmeath. So I just thought, looking at the kind of Division 3 and 4, I thought some exceptional kind of shooting displays just kind of stood out. Anyway, sorry, back to the hurling talk.
Yeah, well, look, I'm wearing the Cork jersey. I'm the Tipperary man wearing the Cork jersey. you're the one of Tipperary heritage who's obviously got Cork blood. Tell us, how cocky are you feeling after watching your native county beat Limerick in their home patch over the weekend?
Not in the least bit cocky. 7 weeks time.
Well, you're obviously not a real Cork man now.
7 weeks time will be the determining factor there. No, it was very interesting. I mean, like the comparison between Limerick and Dublin is probably the interesting one that's going on at the moment. Like they kind of tweaked last night. Like you would have got some odds at the start of the year to say that both of them would do 7 games combined by the end of February and neither have a point on the board. But there's just a question mark, Shane, over how much Limerick are really kind of going for this. But in fairness, I think the halftime changes that we talked earlier about, the 4 changes that Mayo made, like, has there ever been a quartet of substitutions in one hurling match at halftime that have been like really bringing on the big guns from the bench in terms of was it Richie English, Will O'Donoghue, Dermot Burns, and I'm missing one. Was it Galan? Was the 4th one?
Galan, yeah.
You know, like that seemed like a response, and like John Kiley's body language, he certainly didn't seem too impressed with that first half. Do you want to remind me of a little bit, and you would probably maybe identify the date for me. Was it the Tipp Kilkenny League game? Was it 09 or 08? Was it 09 that there was kind of a standoff between Sheedy and Cody on the sideline, and it was just the first sign that Tipp were kind of bringing the fight to Kilkenny. Kilkenny were seen as this invincible side coming off the 08 All-Ireland final destruction. I suppose Cork's issue was probably more immediate in the fact that they were the side that actually suffered that destruction at the hands of Limerick last year. So there had to be some kind of a response. And I thought there had to be a response something early. There had to be a performance like full of kind of just that fight and aggression from the very start. Their tackle count had to go through the roof because in their games against Limerick last year in the league and in championship, the game was over by half time. The game had got completely away from them, you know. So I think that's probably the encouraging aspect from Cork's point of view, that they managed to get that they've added Kieran Joyce, who I think is a really, really player with huge potential. Darragh O'Leary's another addition, I think, on the basis of yesterday in terms of him becoming an option. Like they're both eligible for under 20 this year. I think it's almost certain Joyce won't be playing under 20 championship anyway.
Well, that actually, Hurler in the Ditch made a very good point about this under 20s who could play a championship and therefore be ruled out of the under 20 championship.
Kieran Joyce, an unbelievable list.
Adam English, Colin O'Neill, Colin Coughlin for Limerick. Like a lot of these lads are playing freshers this week as well for UL. Shane Meehan, Keane Galvin with Clare, Cork Daly with Waterford, Oisin Pepper, Richie Lawler with Wexford, Darragh O'Leary, Cork, Patrick Crotty, Clare. I mean, what a list of top talent that may not see under 20 championship action.
Yeah, and guys that have really made their mark, haven't they, over the last couple of weeks? You know, like Meehan has been brilliant for Clare. I know Kelly will get the headlines for the 2-12 yesterday. Like Meehan getting 2-1. He looks like a big prospect for them to kind of keep hold of, you know. So I suppose Joyce's emergence, Connolly Hand's return, I think it's a testament to him. Like, you know, I mean, like, I suppose we'll see kind of what impacts in championship, but I think you have to admire a guy that's gone away, has reacted the right way to get dropped. And like as someone from Cork was pointed out to me over the weekend, it was probably a weekend for that in terms of Cork, because like the footballers lost to Galway, but their best forward was Stephen Sherlock. He was dropped in March 2020 from the senior football panel. He went away, was the best club football forward in last year's championship locally. Lehan was the best club hurling forward in last year's championship locally, and then they both get brought back into the scene, and they're obviously very eager to kind of get going again. And you know, I suppose he showed what he had to offer. But I suppose the one big thing is, well, like the one aspect of it that kind of stood out, a lot of people talking, like it was an unbelievably physical match. Yeah. With a fair old undercurrent now for a league game at the end of February, when, you know, we've accused some league games of kind of being shadow boxing. I mean, I thought Waterford Dublin was pretty feisty and competitive a couple of weeks back in Parnell Park, but this definitely took it up a notch. I mean, it just smacked of a game where one side had got hammered by the other in championship the previous year, came out to try and get stuck in a bit more. And I thought definitely when Limerick's guys, kind of main guys, came on, like Will O'Donoghue and all that, a lot of guys got stuck in. And like as they made the point last night on League Sunday, there was 2 red cards. I think there definitely could have been a couple of more with some of the stuff that was gone in the second half, you know.
Yeah, like Michael Verney there, when we were previewing the Winter All-Ireland in 2020, he ruled Cork out straight away. He said, no, Cork aren't the men for this sort of an occasion. Obviously, they went ahead and proved him right on that occasion. But after they lost the All-Ireland final last year, I think he again was like, you know, this could have huge psychological damage with Cork going forward. My opinion is, every player over the course of their career at some stage gets annihilated in some game. That doesn't finish them for good. That doesn't compromise them in terms of like, for good, do you have the mentality for that game? I think Cork could go and win the All-Ireland this year. I'm not saying it's going to happen, But I'm saying there's going to be no lasting effect from that All-Ireland final last year necessarily.
Well, the early signs are good in terms of the response, but I mean, historically, it has been shown that they haven't exactly recovered from bad beatings. Like you take the Tipperary 2014, I mean, that was followed by a big collapse in 2015 against Galway, a really poor display against Tipp in the old Munster knockout in 16, and then losing to Wexford. Like that team didn't really recover from it.
But they didn't have the quality of players that this panel has.
I accept that. But what I think has been interesting is maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it looks to me like obviously Coleman has become captain, Fitzgibbon at midfield, Kingston at wing forward. I know he got sent off yesterday, but he did get 2 goals, some good scoring for him. Like they all burst onto the scene in 17. Now Coleman and Kingston had both made their championship debuts in 16, but this is their essentially 6th proper season, and they've had 2 interruptions. They're kind of coming to that mid-20 stage now. It feels like they're taking ownership of it. Like I know that you watched the TG4 interview afterwards with Coleman and Fitzgibbon, like, but just thought, I know it's a lot of kind of cliche stuff, but I just thought they kind of spoke well in terms of kind of, as Coleman said, battling the hurt, and then you just have to come back. It just, I suppose it's speaking to what you were saying in terms of you suffer a bad beating, but it didn't sound like he ever thought about kind of quitting and that's it, right? My career is going to be defined by this All-Ireland final loss, but they are becoming the kind of leaders of it. And then for the first time, like Cork didn't have, as you say, that underage talent coming through in 14-15 because they were, really, really bad shape for the guts of a decade in the underage ranks. But just the way they supplemented it now with Joyce and O'Leary coming into the fray, Barrett is kind of in his 2nd year. I thought he got really stuck in a couple of times yesterday, So it was encouraging for them. It was promising. But like Limerick started without 7 of the All-Ireland final team, and the only one of those who's definitely going to be out is Peter Casey. And you look at if I reel off the surnames, I think was it 8 of them are missing, but like the surnames of reel them off to you, like Quaid, Nash, Burns, O'Donoghue, Hegarty, Galan. That's a huge amount of their side to come back into it. So I think in the concerns, I'd say from Dublin football's point of view, I think this concerns are graver than Limerick hurling at the moment, and precisely because it's just very hard for us. Like I know it's our job and our role to be kind of speculating and predicting these things, but like it's very, very hard to evaluate teams because of the fact that there's only that 2-week window between the league final and the start of the championship. I mean, like I would say, looking at overall the 4 counties who've kind of done well, Waterford, Dublin, Wexford and Cork, for those squads, I'd say a league title would be a big boost. I don't think Tipp, Kilkenny, Limerick, Galway, they've all historically won over the last decade, but I mean that quartet have kind of gone a long time. I say Waterford would have won it in 15, wouldn't they? But I think
they won 15-07.
In their current developments, I think they'd be the 4 that a league would be a boost of. But I don't see a league title being a big. Obviously, it's not a big objective for Limerick hurling at the moment.
Christopher Conlon says Limerick will be stopped in their tracks in the championship. Wait and see. River Power says Limerick's performance in this league are more or less the same as last year, and we know what happened after that. Although I would say the manner of this defeat is very different to anything we saw last year.
And they did as well last year. In fairness, I thought lay out a marker against Cork that night in the Gaelic grounds when they scored like 33 points. So maybe we'll see a big fight back in their next 2 games. But they're just doing things that you just don't associate with them. In terms of the touch not being as sharp as, and in terms of some of the shot selection and some of the wides and that, it probably does. One thing it maybe has kind of put paid to was this kind of, would Limerick's B team, how would they fare and all that, that maybe that strength and depth isn't as awe-inspiring as we would have thought, and that like at most teams in history and most teams currently, if you're without kind of 4 or 5 key players, your performances are going to drop off a bit.
James S says Limerick are timing it hard slog of training just now. A Sully 180, I think he's backing me up here. Cork beat Offaly by 10 points in the 84 final, who won the 1985 final then. Offaly, don't underestimate the power of a wounded animal. Can I ask you about Ger Millerick? So we know he missed the All-Ireland last year. He's been detailed to man-mark Keane Lynch in any game that these teams have played otherwise in recent times. Like, he missed the All-Ireland final last year, which is the point Colin Ryan made earlier on. I mean, you could make a point for a lot of players being the most important player that Cork have. But when you're coming up against Limerick, the main man you have to try and stop is the best hurler in the country, Keane Lynch. Tipperary tried a few different lads in him. It doesn't always work. Is Ger Millerick, for this reason alone, arguably Cork's most important player?
Well, I'm not trying to be Captain Hindsight now with this, but I do remember when that was confirmed, I was thinking whatever hope I would have thought of Cork. I really thought their prospects were in big trouble when he was ruled out, just because of the job he'd done on TJ Reid in the All-Ireland semi-final, and just because I would have thought that he was the best option to go after Lynch, and then leave Coleman, I suppose, kind of free and be that kind of quarterback role that he'd done very well against Kilkenny. You think about the ball he put into Jack O'Connor's hand to set up the goal. And Cork obviously struggled. They never got a handle on Lynch at all in that game. But look, he's been a very, very highly rated guy for a long time. I know he played fullback in the start of a couple of league games this year. I don't really think that's his best position. I think further out the field. I mean, he's played sometimes in midfield for his club. He was a big loss for them last year when they lost the county final. But he doesn't look the biggest, he doesn't look the most kind of physically powerful or whatever, but he does seem kind of an old style specialist marker, able to kind of do a job on a forward, while at the same time being quite a good stick man. It's not like he's just...
he gets onto the ball, doesn't he?
Like, he does, yeah.
Yeah, as soon as Cork have it, he's showing for it. And as soon as they don't, he's all over Lynch like a rash.
So he's basically combining the best traits of like your classic defender with the kind of more modern. So like you'd imagine that's... kind of the way to go. I mean, like, ultimately, you would think if the success that Limerick have with Hannon as the quarterback, you think Coleman is kind of perfect for that role in the Cork sense. But he will just need guys to, he'll need a pack of players working really, really hard in front of him to kind of offer that screen the way Limerick have, with the importance of the likes of Will O'Donoghue, Darragh Donovan and that. And obviously someone to kind of help do the defensive duty. So if you keep Millerick fit, because he's had a lot of injury problems for a young guy, there's been different stages of his career. He's been out. I suppose it's hard to kind of pin it down to kind of one guy is absolutely indispensable, but it is interesting for a guy who, hasn't been a champion for Mcgregor over the last 3 or 4 years. He's suddenly, just for the style of play, he seems to become very, very important for Cork.
Yeah, there's not many lads who can do that. I think Tim O'Mahony could be a little bit more disciplined a couple of times, like on the ball, losing the ball, and then obviously he had that little tete-a-tete with Darragh Donovan. Niall O'Leary just getting exposed once or twice. There's a lot of really good stuff, but then once or twice gets caught out, and I'm not even necessarily talking about the time he got turned over for the goal. Kilkenny, we haven't mentioned them. They beat Laois 228 to 17 points. I suppose because of the manner of the victory, there's probably not too much to say about it other than Tom Phelan hit 2-1. Alan Murphy, he scored 13 points from frees. Billy Ryan and Martin Keown hit 4 points apiece. Stephen Maher, Jack Kelly and Ross King, they all got 3 points each for Laois. Like, Laois have the worst defence out of the 12 teams in the top two. It's not going great for them, and they probably have the more favourable side of the draw too.
Yeah, that was a big enough beating out to get last week. I think we discussed, what could be the effect of conceding 7 goals against Waterford, and I was saying, if you kind of get back to the stage, where you've I suppose you're competitive like you are against Tipperary, that it can kind of maybe not result in the morale and the squad being kind of overly damaged. But look, I think from the outset it was all about next week's game, and I think it is interesting, and I think it's a great credit. Like, it's actually the live game at TG Carter, 3:45 next Sunday, Laois v Antrim, and I presume from the outset both of them would have targeted this as the game. It is interesting. Like, I suppose from the 4 teams that are on 0 points across 1A and 1B, I think most people would have argued the 3 of them that would have been in contention were Laois, Offaly and Antrim, but Limerick are actually the 4th at present. You'd imagine that it'll be Offaly will probably finish bottom of 1A, but I think from the outside, Laois and Antrim, it's about kind of surviving. But Antrim was probably which is worse, I suppose, these beatings or the morale victories that Antrim are getting. That's the second one now, the Dublin one, were a game that they probably felt that they kind of left behind them, given that they were at home against Waterford yesterday. Particularly, I suppose, the kind of start and the fact that Waterford kind of had a man sent off, not being able to kind of finish that off. But yeah, look, for them at Laois, I think it was all. This date would have been circled in the calendar March 6th, and I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to get a bit of coverage, TV, which, as you said, live TV again, which is good, and a bit of spotlight, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of games served up.
Yeah, I'm just going to run through some of the other results in the other tiers, and maybe we'll touch on a little bit on that. Carlow lost at home to Kerry, 20 points to 13. Shane Conway was on fire there. Eric Lean was actually sent off for Kerry on 51 minutes, but they still won the rest of the game by 6 points to 2. That's the second win for them. Down, they lost at home to Kildare by a point, 22 points to 217. That's their first defeat of the league. They've been flying. A couple of goals from Jack Sheridan for Kildare. Meath 115, Westmeath with a fairly tasty 423 there. Niall Mitchell, he scored a couple of goals. Killian Doyle added a third, and then Owen Keys got a fourth later on. So that's Joe Fortune's team up into a shared lead at the top of the table there in Division 2A. 2B, Thomas Cawley was the star turn for Sligo in their 124 to 115 win over London. Wicklow and Donegal. Wicklow 3-8, Donegal 2-16. Ronan McDermott actually made an 100th appearance for his county there and scored a goal, and as did Bernard Lafferty. So that put Donegal 11 points clear at the break, and they went on to win there. Derry put up 424 against Mayo's 113. Now that's a serious beating. That's three wins from 3 for Derry there. They were very strong. John Mullen got a goal there. It was 2-15 to 1-4 at the break, and Declan Foley added another goal after the break. Division 3A then, Monaghan 2-7, Louth 7 points. Roscommon hammered Warwickshire 420 to 6. Tyrone saw off Armagh by 221 to 114, and in 3B, Lancashire 311, Longford 126. So good away win there, albeit in Abbottstown. And Leitrim saw off Cavan by 113 to 9 points. Anything you want to touch on there? Actually, I'll just throw up this comment to you. Kay Cat says Kilkenny have no top-class players anymore with no plan B from Cody if things are going wrong. And, well, I suppose there's Ballyhale players to come back as well as what's there. And sure, not everyone agrees at that point. Joe LK20, really hard to know how teams are going. Typical Kilkenny trying to transform their game. Still don't know Galway at this stage and where they're at. Waterford, Cork, Wexford, Dublin are progressing. Do you want to take up any of those points before we finish up, Fintan?
I'll just say two things. Like that last one, that would be the one that I tick the box with, in terms of subscribing to a lot of that thoughts that it's the Waterford, Cork, Wexford, Dublin quartet that are probably impressing at the moment. In terms of ultimately maybe their need was a bit greater. I just still think, like Tipp Kilkenny, it just smacked of, as we said, I think the day in Semple Stadium, it was their first time beaten since the 2019 final. And aside from the setting and like the weather and everything, it just felt with the makeup of the teams on the pitch, it was just a complete change in terms of them just trying to figure out kind of where they were going. I suppose just the Division 2 results, it just makes that promotion race quite interesting. Probably a big win for Kerry and the fact that they'll get the Kinaway lads back now, that they won up in Carlow after losing the first day against Westmeath. Like Shane Conway scored 10 points. Just in Paddy Hearn, I suppose as much discussed after they played Tipperary in the Waterford Crystal Cup, but the Limerick guy, like he got 2 points, and they've also had Louis D, another Limerick player in goal. So Stephen Lumphy's obviously sticking with those guys in terms of kind of starting them and kind of being the mainstays of the side. Westmeath probably going to be kind of the front runners, but obviously Kildare's been again, like obviously that's another example. Like Sheridan coming back into the fray after kind of the heroics for Naas, like he's obviously a huge boost for them to be getting back into it at that level. And obviously similar kind of a club vein like the Schlockney lads for Derry, they're obviously the kind of pace setters in Division 2B at the moment. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well that's it from the show today. From myself, from Colin Ryan, Martin Carney and Fintan O'Toole as well. We're brought to you by orgaretro.com. If you want to get this Cork jersey, any of the jerseys there, every county is covered, go to orgaretro.com and use the promo code OurGame. Fintan, thank you very much. We'll do it again very soon. Cheers, Shane. Chat to you soon.